Chapter 1321. Ah, there's such an exchange? When Xiao Hua heard the cultivator's words, he couldn't help but smile. He cupped his hands and said, "Fellow cultivator, I have some things I want to talk to you about." The cultivator impatiently put down the book and pointed at the small stall. "Fellow Taoist, this poor Taoist has already said it clearly. This poor Taoist's spirit herbs are all here. If fellow Taoist wants them, then take the spirit stones. If not, then go somewhere else. Fellow Taoist must disturb this poor Taoist cultivation. This is a great sin." Xiao Hua smiled and said, "What I need, your stall doesn't have. Noisy. If you don't have it, then what the hell are you talking about? Just leave." As the cultivator spoke, he picked up the book again. This poor Taoist wants to discuss with fellow Taoist about buying some spirit grass seeds from fellow Taoist? Xiao Hua whispered his thoughts. Buy seeds? The cultivator was stunned. He immediately put down the book and showed a curious expression. "What do you want seeds for? Aren't the spiritual herbs I have enough for your needs?" When the cultivator said this, Xiao Hua was stunned. He said curiously, "Fellow cultivator, if you want to sell, then tell I that you can. If you don't want to sell, then tell I that you can't. Why do you care if I want to buy seeds?" Xiao Hua's words were very similar to what the cultivator said just now. Xiao Hua was prepared. As long as the cultivator turned hostile, he would turn around and leave. E.g. was so big, how could he worry about not being able to buy spiritual herb seeds? Strangely, when Xiao Hua said this, the cultivator laughed and cupped his hands. "I'm Ling Zhongyu of the Grass Spirit Sect. How should I address you?" Strange. This person's temper is really strange. When you talk to him nicely, he ignores you. When you scold him, he learns to be obedient. Xiao Hua thought to himself. He also cupped his hands and said, "I'm Xiao Hua." "Oh, fellow cultivator Xiao, don't blame I for talking too much. I have been in EG for many years, but it's always people who come to buy spiritual herbs. I've never heard of anyone buying seeds, so I was curious," Ling Zhongyu said with a smile. "And after seeing your fake cultivation and your concealed cultivation, I feel that fellow cultivator Zhao's cultivation is about the same as mine. Maybe fellow cultivator Xiao and I are the same kind of people?" Xiao Hua was stunned. "Who? Haha, is there a need to say? If you want to buy seeds, what else can you do if you don't want to study spiritual herbs?" Ling Zhongyu picked up the book that was thrown aside and shook it. Xiao Hua saw clearly that there were two big words on it, Codex of Herbs. "Oh, this is good stuff." Xiao Hua's heart jumped. "Then," he said, "fellow cultivator, you're really the same kind of person." Sigh, because of spiritual herbs, I's cultivation was delayed. "Fellow cultivator, can you let I take a look at this Codex of Herbs?" "Of course." Ling Zhongyu carefully handed over the Codex of Herbs and said with a smile, "I am the same. Master said that if it weren't for the fact that I put too much effort into spiritual herbs, my cultivation could have increased by a few levels." Seeing that Ling Zhongyu handed over the Codex of Herbs without hesitation, Xiao Hua's heart was very warm. He casually flipped through it a few times. This is fierce sungrass? He accidentally flipped to a fiery red spiritual herb that looked like fire. Xiao Hua frowned. A name jumped out from his mind. Fierce sungrass? This fierce sungrass should be called fierce sungrass, right? But I don't think I've seen the picture of this fierce sungrass in Shanghuaming. How do I know that it should be called fierce sungrass? Xiao Hua was surprised. He handed the Codex of Herbs over and asked, "Fellow cultivator Ling, this fierce sungrass, is there another name called fierce sungrass?" "What? Another name?" Ling Zhongyu took the Codex of Herbs and casually glanced at it. He immediately denied it. "Fierce sungrass doesn't have another name. Moreover, I have never heard of any fierce sungrass. Could it be there's a fierce sungrass in your sect's ancient books?" Speaking up to here, Ling Zhongyu's eyes were filled with fervor. Xiao Hua shook his head with a wry smile and said, "This poor Taoist only saw it from an incomplete page of a book. That page was lost long ago. Even if this poor Taoist wanted to give it to fellow Taoist, it was impossible. So it's like this. What else is on that page?" Ling Zhongyu asked in disappointment. Hearing this, the appearance and names of some spiritual herbs indeed appeared in Xiaohua's mind. Something like dragon scale fruit, something like iron bone grass, they were all strange spiritual herbs. Haha, they are all strange spiritual herbs. There are no records of them in the ordinary codex of herbs. Xiaohua laughed. Sigh, what a pity. I can't take a look. Ling Zhongyu was rather disappointed. It seemed like he was really obsessed with studying spiritual herbs. By the way, fellow cultivator Ling, what do you plan to do about what I said just now? Xiaohua changed the topic. Fellow cultivator, are you talking about seeds? Ling Zhongyu regained his senses and asked, Yes. I wonder if fellow cultivator is willing to part with them? Seeds of spiritual herbs. In other sects, such as the 10,000 Flower Valley or the 100 Herbs faction, they might not agree so easily. Even if they agree, I'm afraid they won't be able to find many seeds. But for my grass spirit sect? Hee, it's nothing. My grass spirit sect specializes in growing spiritual herbs. Xiaohua was overjoyed when he heard this. He cupped his hands and said, Then fellow cultivator Ling, how do you want to exchange for these seeds? Do you want spirit stones? Or do you want other things? Of course spirit stones are the best. Ling Zhongyu laughed. If you don't have spirit stones, fellow cultivator Zhao's spiritual pills are also fine. How about 100-year-old spiritual herbs? Or middle-grade yellow talismans? Xiaohua hesitated and asked, Let's go with spirit stones and spiritual pills. My grass spirit sect doesn't lack anything else. Ling Zhongyu laughed. Then, all right. Although Xiaohua wanted to use high-grade fireball talismans to exchange for spirit stones, Ling Zhongyu didn't lack them. He could only use real middle-grade spirit stones to exchange. Perhaps it was because Xiaohua also liked spirit grasses. The price Ling Zhongyu quoted was very cheap, far exceeding Xiaohua's expectations. Xiaohua was very satisfied, but when Xiaohua was about to take out the spirit stones, he was stopped by Ling Zhongyu. Fellow Taoist Xiao, this poor Taoist came to EG to sell spirit grasses. How could I bring these seeds? What this poor Taoist said to fellow Taoist today, I will report to Master when I return to the mountain. If nothing unexpected happens, I will be able to bring the seeds you need in 3 days. 3 days later. Xiaohua was slightly stunned. However, after thinking for a while, he realized that Ling Zhongyu was right. Who would bring so many seeds for no reason? Then, since fellow cultivator wants to return to the mountain, I wonder, can you bring the seeds of your sect's spiritual herbs? Oh, or the seeds that can't germinate and are no longer used can be brought to I as well. Xiaohua's words were somewhat exorbitant. Ling Zhongyu frowned. After thinking for a while, he nodded and said, I can understand fellow cultivators' thoughts. When you see the grass spirit book, you only want to plant all the spiritual herbs recorded in it. Only then will you be satisfied. But I wonder if Master will agree. Then please put in a good word for me, fellow cultivator Ling. Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, all right. Since I have agreed, I will do my best. Fellow cultivator, don't worry. Please come and get it in 3 days. Ling Zhongyu said with a smile. Thank you for your help, fellow cultivator Ling. Xiaohua cupped his hands and thanked him. After he took 2 steps, he stopped again with a hesitant expression. Ling Zhongyu had a good impression of Xiaohua. Seeing him hesitate, he took the initiative and said with a smile, Fellow cultivator Xiao, could it be that there's something wrong? Xiaohua looked at him and then looked around. After choosing his words, he asked, Alas, fellow cultivator Ling, actually I also want to get some spiritual herbs for a living like your sect. But the spiritual herbs in EG, the price is really too low. It's not easy to make a living. After hearing this, Ling Zhongyu felt the same way. With a sympathetic look, he almost hugged Xiaohua and said, Fellow cultivator Xiao is right. Spiritual herbs that are decades old and centuries old are rare. But even so, they can't be compared to those yellow talismans and elixirs. It's because the techniques of refining elixirs and creating talismans are really secret techniques. Very few people know them. And planting spiritual herbs is simple. Who doesn't know how to do it? It's just a matter of whether the planting is good or bad. Even if they don't know how to do it, they can go to places with rich spiritual energy. Most of the time, they can find them. No wonder the price of spiritual herbs is so low. As the saying goes, skills have their own specialties. The rarer something is, the more valuable it is. Xiao Hua sighed. Yes, exactly. Ling Zhongyu nodded. How about, there are a lot fewer cultivators like you and me who study spiritual herbs. The two talked for a while, then Xiao Hua took his leave. After settling the matter of the seeds, Xiao Hua's mood was very good. The reverse light in his mind's space rotated every day, and the light was also shining all the time. Planting a few more spirit grasses and planting a few less spirit grasses didn't seem to have much of an effect. Moreover, there seemed to be a lot of empty space inside the space. Xiao Hua only needed about 10 feet of space to store things. Xiao Hua actually wanted to plant spirit grasses inside the space. That would be 2 years of growth in a day. Casually taking out a stalk of spirit grasses could be exchanged for spirit stones or spirit pills. Looking at the sky, and then looking at the places he had just explored, Xiao Hua knew that this EG was definitely not something he could explore in a day. Moreover, other than high-grade fireball talismans and 200-year-old spiritual herbs, he really didn't have anything else to exchange. If he took out 200-year-old spiritual herbs many times in a day, wouldn't it be easy for others to notice him? Xiao Hua's cultivation was too low. He didn't dare to take this risk. Having developed a vigilant heart, Xiao Hua no longer wandered around. Looking left and right, he found EG and took down the camouflage cloth in a secluded place. Looking at the exquisite camouflage cloth in his hand, Xiao Hua couldn't help but smile. This camouflage cloth was very comfortable on his body. Although it could only cover his face, Xiao Hua felt that exchanging a few high-grade fireball talismans for it was really worth it. This young cultivator is also a loose cultivator, but he seems to be quite different from Pai Lon, Duoxiong, and the others. He relies on his own camouflage cloth to cultivate. He can be considered self-reliant. I just don't know where he cultivates. If I can make friends with him, it would be a good thing. Xiao Hua couldn't help but look at the stall before noon, but it was already empty. He didn't know if the camouflage cloth was sold out, or did that young cultivator leave a step earlier. Oh, right. How is this camouflage cloth made? It can actually change one's face. It's really amazing. Xiao Hua thought again. However, when he looked at the camouflage cloth for a long time, he couldn't see anything. Only then did he put it in his storage bag and quickly return to the inn. Since he decided to go to EG more often, Xiao Hua didn't change inns. He threw a mid-grade spirit stone on the counter and booked a room for 5 days. Taking the yellow talisman from the innkeeper, Xiao Hua didn't let the waiter follow him and returned to the room by himself. Now Xiao Hua somewhat understood that inside the inn, spirit stones were used for transactions. It seemed that taking out 1 or 2 mid-grade spirit stones wouldn't attract attention, so he didn't hide anything. After returning to the room, Xiao Hua didn't rest. He knew that using a talisman brush to draw low-grade fireball talismans was a condition for him to enter Heaven Forsaken. He had to quickly draw the fireball talismans. He didn't want to be unable to enter Heaven Forsaken when he could clearly refine high-grade fireball talismans. Wouldn't that be a matter of eternal regret? Just like before, Xiao Hua prepared the talisman ink and talisman paper. Because he knew that he wasn't confident, Xiao Hua specially took out the talisman paper he exchanged from EG. Xiao Hua closed his eyes for a moment, still silently reciting the runes of the fireball talisman in his heart. Then he used his hand to grab the talisman brush, dipped it in talisman ink, and smoothly drew on the talisman paper. -5. Chapter 1322. I'm afraid this is the 20th talisman paper? Xiao Hua's expression was somewhat gloomy as he looked at the talisman paper. The thickness of the talisman paper was uneven, and the talisman characters were somewhat deformed. Xiao Hua was incomparably familiar with the talisman characters of the fireball talisman in his mind. He could draw it casually with his hand, but after using the talisman brush, it wasn't that he couldn't control his magic power, but the strength of the brush was different. No matter how he held the light talisman brush, it was simply like a colossal object that weighed tens of thousands of kilograms. He didn't know how to draw it again. Xiao Hua pondered. The talisman paper caught fire with a pong sound. Xiao Hua fiercely spat out a mouthful of saliva, threw the talisman brush on the ground, clapped his hand, and took out a high-grade talisman paper. Then, he dipped his hand in talisman ink and flicked his fingers. In a short moment, the talisman characters of the fireball talisman took shape. Immediately after, a strange spell was cast. Huff, after casting the last spell and seeing that the fireball talisman was completed, Xiao Hua let out a long breath. It could be considered that he spat out the gloominess of failing to refine the fireball talisman 20 times with the talisman brush. It's really strange. This talisman paper was refined quite smoothly with the fingers. Why do others have to use a talisman brush to refine it? Oh, it should be drawn. How can a talisman brush be used to refine it? Xiao Hua was extremely puzzled. No wonder Senior Ma said that this talisman crafting method is very difficult. It can only be successfully refined many times. I only wasted 20 talisman papers. It's not much. Xiao Hua looked at the talisman brush on the ground and was too lazy to refine it again. To tell the truth, if anyone could refine a high-grade yellow talisman, who would rack their brains and painstakingly struggle to draw a low-grade yellow talisman? There's nothing I can do. Nothing I can do. Xiao Hua muttered and took out the small booklet with the incomplete confinement talisman. This was the happiest thing for him today. Of course, he had to leave it for last to enjoy. Xiao Hua took out the booklet. This booklet was much thicker than the small booklet for the fireball talisman. There were also many more talisman characters inside. The annotations, explanations, and so on were all complete. Unfortunately, at the end of the booklet, there were a few pages missing, and it seemed very incomplete. Of course, this kind of imperfection was only for others. Xiao Hua didn't think so. He first roughly looked at it. Although Xiao Hua had never seen the runes of this confinement talisman before, it looked really complicated. It was more than a level more troublesome than the fireball talisman's runes. However, it was one thing for Xiao Hua to look at it, but moving it with his fingers was another thing. Xiao Hua read the runes of the imprisonment talisman several times, then closed the booklet and memorized the runes in his heart. While memorizing the runes, his fingers couldn't help but move. Not only one hand, but the other hand also moved. An extremely nimble feeling came from his fingertips. The magic power in his body was also extremely free and easy as it flowed to his fingertips along with the hand seals. Xiao Hua almost had a feeling that if it wasn't for the lack of a certain opportunity, he could almost directly inscribe the runes in this technique onto the talisman paper. Could it be that this young master is really a talisman crafting genius? Xiao Hua was all smiles, and his little tail was already curled up. He dipped his finger into the ink, and his 5 fingers started to draw runes in the air. However, things were not as Xiao Hua had imagined. The runes of this confinement talisman were rather complicated. After using the ink, because he had to control his spiritual power and drive the ink to wrap spiritual power, it was not as easy as just waving his fingers. Before he could finish drawing all the runes, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth wrapped in the ink had already dissipated, and the ink scattered all over the ground. And what's going on? Xiao Hua listened, and his eyes stared blankly at the dissipating spiritual power. He was somewhat depressed. Could it be that without the method of inscribing the runes, this confinement talisman really can't be refined? Thinking about it, the method of inscribing the confinement talisman was combined with the previous method of inscribing the runes. It was something that countless ancestors of the Dawn Rain continent had practiced and created. Xiao Hua erased the method of inscribing the confinement talisman as soon as he came up and wanted to successfully refine it. Opening up a new path, how? Could it be simple and easy? Xiao Hua thought for a moment and tried a few more times. The result was the same. He couldn't finish inscribing the runes every time. Soon after, Xiao Hua tried using his other hand, and the result was the same. Alas, Xiao Hua shook his hand, and the ink was thrown away. He said self-deprecatingly, "It seems that this young master was too arrogant." As he spoke, he sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and adjusted his breathing. After an unknown amount of time, Xiao Hua suddenly jumped up from the ground and energetically patted his storage pouch. He took out the talisman paper, ink, and booklet containing the confinement talisman. He was still muttering, "Damn it! Why am I so stupid? Why can't I do this? Why didn't I think of it before?" Xiaohua carefully looked at the runes of the confinement talisman a few more times. He was still muttering, but no words could be heard. The fingers of his two hands were still nimble. What was different from before was that the hand seals of Xiaohua's two hands were different. Soon after, when Xiaohua felt that he was already proficient, he waved his hands and dipped them in ink. His 10 fingers flicked together, and he actually used both hands to execute the same hand seal. The first round of the hand seal wasn't very smooth, and there were many places where Xiaohua's mind couldn't keep up. But strangely, Xiaohua's hands were extremely fluent in making up for these flawed places. There was no need for Xiaohua's mind to cooperate. When Xiaohua finished inscribing, the ink that wrapped the spiritual power didn't dissipate, but because the runes were drawn with both hands at the same time, it seemed slightly unbalanced. The corner of Xiaohua's mouth curled up into a smile. He didn't use the final spell and allowed the rune to gradually disappear. Looking at the time when the runes began to disappear, it was actually a long time later. Oh, so it's like this. Once the runes of the confinement talisman are completely drawn, the spiritual power of heaven and earth can flow between the runes without leaking, and the runes can also be preserved for a long time. If the runes aren't completely drawn, the spiritual power of heaven and earth may flow into the air. The so-called method of writing runes must be a method to control the spiritual power of heaven and earth and not let it dissipate easily in the air. Immediately, Xiaohua tried a dozen more times. Every time, he didn't use the final technique. He only drew the rune of the imprisonment talisman in the air. As the rune became more complete, the time the rune stayed in the air became longer and longer. Actually, if I can stop this rune, I don't need to draw it on the talisman paper. It can also turn into a yellow talisman. The idea was very easy, but it was extremely difficult to do. Xiaohua didn't know what to use to replace the talisman paper and the ink. When the last confinement talisman stopped in the air, Xiaohua's hand seals changed, and the runes gradually flashed, absorbing the spiritual power of heaven and earth in the surroundings. Along with the hand seal in Xiaohua's hand, a chi sound was heard, and the runes entered a high-grade talisman paper. With a flash of brilliance, a confinement talisman was successfully refined by Xiaohua without any mishap. Like I said, I am a genius at refining yellow talismans. Xiaohua's eyes were so mesmerized that they became slits. He very lovingly picked up the extremely exquisite confinement talisman. The confinement talisman was earth yellow in color, and the talisman characters on it were densely packed like a fine spider web. These fine talisman characters seemed to be floating on top of the talisman paper. With a slight movement of his fingers, the earth yellow brilliance faintly flowed like mercury. Just this appearance alone was several grades higher than the fireball talisman. It was truly worthy of being called a high-level yellow talisman. I don't know what grade this confinement talisman is. No matter what, it should be a middle-grade talisman. Xiaohua thought in his heart, and he checked the spiritual power in his body. The check wasn't very tight, and his spiritual power increased a bit. Although it wasn't much, it was still a bit more than refining the fireball talisman. It seemed that refining confinement talismans was also a good way to cultivate. Thinking that the agreed time with Ling Zhongyu was 3 days later, Xiaohua didn't want to go to EG anymore. He hid in the inn and alternately refined the fireball talisman and confinement talisman. At the same time, he also comprehended the Tao of Heaven and cultivated Shang Hua Ming's second level of Qi refining cultivation technique. 3 days passed extremely quickly, and in the blink of an eye, it was time. Xiaohua very reluctantly came out from the inn. If it wasn't for the inn's daily payment of 20 low-grade spirit stones, if it wasn't for Xiaohua didn't have any cultivation techniques above the second level of Qi refining to cultivate. If it wasn't for the limited spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the inn, if it wasn't for Xiaohua's 3 days of cultivation were only equivalent to a day for others. Xiaohua really wanted to continue cultivating in such a leisurely manner. However, in these 3 days, Xiaohua's harvest was also huge. In addition to the increase in his spiritual power and the advancement of his cultivation, the talisman ink and talisman paper exchange from EG were all refined into fireball talismans and confinement talismans. The only thing that made Xiao Hua feel regretful was that the fireball talisman he refined with the talisman pin still didn't succeed. After leaving the inn, Xiao Hua pinched the message talisman in his storage bag and felt a little bewildered. It's already been a few days, but I still haven't seen Senior Ma's message. Should I send a message talisman to ask? But what if he wants me to test it? I also can't draw a fireball talisman. It's better not to send a message first. Wait until I get the spirit grass seeds and let the puppets sow them in the space first. I should draw a fireball talisman first. The cultivation technique, that's the most important thing. Xiao Hua thought and arrived outside EG. He found a remote place and put on the so-called camouflage cloak before entering EG. Today's EG was just as lively as a few days ago, but the people were different. As for how many cultivators there were compared to a few days ago, only the heavens knew. At the very least, Xiao Hua, who was wearing the camouflage cloak, was the same. Cough, cough. There was also that young cultivator who was selling Taoist robes the moment he entered EG. Everyone, come and take a look. This is a top-notch Taoist robe. Aside from having no defense, it has all the functions of removing dust, removing odors, and so on. It's much cheaper than the Taoist robes that fellow Taoist usually uses. Fellow Taoist, don't look at how your Taoist robe is of the highest quality. However, fellow Taoist should always wear something else. Who knows when it might be of use? Hearing this somewhat familiar voice, the corner of Xiao Hua's mouth slightly rose. -5. Chapter 1323. Seeing that there weren't many people in front of his stall, Xiao Hua cupped his hands and smiled. Fellow Taoist Fu. Seeing this, the young cultivator smiled and said, Fellow Taoist, you really have good eyesight. Hey, fellow Taoist's bewilderment looks quite familiar. I exchanged fireball talismans for this 3 days ago. Does fellow Taoist Fu still remember? Haha, of course I do. The cultivator laughed. Fellow Taoist Zhao's fireball talismans are really good. I have already exchanged them for many good things. This is all thanks to fellow Taoist Xiao. Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hands and said that he didn't dare. Right, fellow Taoist Xiao, do you still have fireball talismans today? The cultivator became interested. Looking at his stall, he smiled and said, How about you give me some Taoist robes? I'll give you a discount. Xiao Hua didn't want these. He waved his hands and said with a smile, I don't have any more fireball talismans on me. I just came here to look around. I don't plan to buy anything. So it's like this. Then, fellow Taoist Xiao, you can look around first. The young cultivator's expression changed slightly. He was about to greet others when Xiao Hua immediately called out, Right, fellow Taoist Fu. I heard fellow Taoist mention a few days ago that you're also a loose cultivator? I wasn't a loose cultivator before. It's just that I encountered some things later on and had no choice but to become a loose cultivator. Fortunately, I have some skills and can make some very basic magic tools. I can barely take care of my own cultivation. It seemed that he didn't want to say more. Magic tools? These are all magic tools? Xiao Hua looked at the Taoist robes in his hands and asked curiously. Seeing that there were no cultivators nearby, Zhao Yin turned his head and said, These Taoist robes and the bewilderment on your body can all be considered magic tools. It's just that they're extremely crude. Qiqiao sect focuses on refining magic tools. Sect Master Taoist Lu Hong is a famous master refiner in my country of Xi. Fellow Taoist Fu's refining skills. Xiao Hua felt that something was wrong halfway through his words and immediately stopped. At the same time, another female cultivator in front of him was attracted by the exquisite Taoist robes. Zhao Yin eloquently introduced them. Xiao Hua took a look, shook his head slightly, and turned around to look for Ling Zhongyu. Ling Zhongyu's spiritual grass sect stall was still there. Ling Zhongyu was still the same, reading the grass codex with relish. Xiao Hua smiled and said, Taoist Ling. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to finish, Ling Zhongyu didn't even raise his head and said, These spiritual plants cost 1 low-grade spirit stone each. Fellow Taoist, You can put down the spirit stone and take the spiritual plant that you like." His tone and words were exactly the same as 3 days ago. Presumably, he had to say these words every day. "Hee, fellow Taoistling, have you brought I's spirit grass seeds?" Xiao Hua asked in a slightly louder voice. "Oh, so it's fellow Taoist Xiao. You're finally here. I thought you wouldn't come." When Ling Zhongyu heard that, he hurriedly put down the book and removed the storage bag from his waist. He said, "If you don't come, I will be in trouble." Xiao Hua asked curiously, "Didn't fellow Taoist Ling say 3 days later? Isn't today the 4th day? Could it be that I remembered wrongly?" "Oh, right. You really remembered wrongly. When I said 3 days later, it was the 3rd day, which was yesterday. When I returned to the mountain yesterday, I was scolded by Master. He said that I didn't take your deposit. If you really didn't sell it, Master and I would have worked for nothing." I'm sorry. Xiao Hua smiled and hurriedly took out the promised spirit stones. He said, "Since that's the case, fellow Taoist Ling, please accept the spirit stones first. I will look at the seeds." "It's okay. This storage bag contains the seeds that fellow Taoist Xiao wants. I took out almost all the spiritual plant seeds in the spiritual grass sect. I picked 10 seeds of each spiritual plant." "Oh, right. There are also some shriveled seeds in the storage bag. There are also some seeds that I don't know the names of and can't be planted. I'll give them all to fellow Taoist Xiao." As Ling Zhongyu spoke, he took the spirit stones and put them into another storage bag. Then, he handed the storage bag in his hand to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua opened the storage bag and looked inside. There were indeed many seeds in the storage bag, far exceeding his expectations. He smiled and put the seeds into his storage bag. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist Ling. It's okay. If fellow Taoist Xiao comes across any rare spiritual plants in the future, you can bring them to I. The spiritual grass sect is also willing to buy such spiritual plants." Ling Zhongyu waved his hand and took the storage bag with a smile. "Haha, of course. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and bid farewell. After leaving the spiritual grass sect stall, Xiao Hua found a place with fewer people and put the storage bag into the maze. With a stroke of his hand, all the spiritual plant seeds were put into the space. Xiao Hua was still quite anxious. 1 day in the space was equivalent to 2 years in the outside world. Moreover, while he was refining the yellow talismans and cultivating in the inn, Xiao Hua had already ordered the puppets in the space to cultivate the spiritual plants. Now that he had the seeds in hand, Xiao Hua naturally wouldn't waste any time. After putting the seeds into the space, he ordered the puppets to start planting. Xiao Hua paid attention to the things in the space as he casually walked forward. After walking for about the time it took to eat a meal, he came to a place where there weren't many people. Looking around, Xiao Hua was quite puzzled. This place wasn't small, but there were only a few stalls. The number of people who came here could be counted. It was far from the bustling scene he saw earlier. Xiao Hua looked around and saw that the items in the stalls were all black and yellow. There were all kinds of shapes and sizes. Moreover, he couldn't tell what they were used for. Looking at the few cultivators in front of the stalls, Xiao Hua could see that all of them had cultivations above the 10th level of foundation establishment. There were even 2 that Xiao Hua couldn't see through. If they weren't foundation establishment cultivators, then they were golden core cultivators. Xiao Hua didn't dare to go forward. After hesitating for a moment, he was about to retreat. At this time, he came face to face with a dark and thin man. That man looked a little anxious and walked in a hurry. Moreover, Xiao Hua couldn't see the man's cultivation. Seeing that the man was coming face to face, Xiao Hua was so frightened that he quickly retreated to the side and made way. That man walked past Xiao Hua without even looking at Xiao Hua and went straight to an empty stall. With a clap of his hand, dozens of similar black items were placed on the stall. Then, without waiting for the cultivator to sit down, a water blue brilliance flashed above the stall. A distorted figure appeared in the air. Xiao Hua could see clearly that it was a Jinghua City disciple around the 9th level of Qi refinement. "Senior, please pay the admission spirit stones." The disciple very politely cupped his hands and said to the cultivator. The cultivator said in a bad mood, "Didn't you see that I just came? I haven't exchanged anything yet." How can I pay you spirit stones? Hee hee, senior must be joking. As long as you place something in EG and want to exchange, my Jingwa City will charge 10 low-grade spirit stones for admission. These 10 low-grade spirit stones won't be in senior's eyes, right? The Jingwa City disciple said. Of course I won't be in senior's eyes. But I haven't started the exchange yet. How can I pay spirit stones? If I don't exchange anything after paying spirit stones, wouldn't I have paid 10 low-grade spirit stones for nothing? The dark and thin cultivator's anxious expression slowly faded, and he began to argue with the Jingwa City disciple. Hee hee, I'll let senior know. My Jingwa City opened the e-market and e-bazaar for the convenience of fellow cultivators so that they can have a place to trade without worry. 10 low-grade spirit stones for the e-market and 1 mid-grade spirit stone for the e-market are both very cheap. Just based on the fact that my Jingwa City disciples can protect the entire e-market and e-market without any accidents, it is worth it. It's not senior's first time here. So why are you making things difficult for this junior? Hee hee, I was originally going to participate in the EG Bazaar in 10 days, but there are some urgent matters in the sect and I can't make it back in 10 days. Don't you think I's depressed? I would rather pay you 1 spirit stone. I wouldn't dare. Today is EG. Senior only needs to pay 10 low-grade spirit stones. The Jingwa City disciple was clearly well-trained and his words were watertight. Okay, you can go now. Don't delay I's exchange. With that, the cultivator took out 10 spirit stones from his storage bag and threw them over. The Jingwa City disciple took the spirit stones and immediately disappeared in a flash. As soon as the figure of the Jingwa City disciple disappeared, the dark and thin cultivator waved his hand, and a dozen large words appeared in front of the stall. Xiao Hua then heard the cultivator shout, "Fellow Taoists, this poor Taoist has some rarely seen demonic tools. Originally, I was going to bring them to the market in 10 days, but today, I really had no choice but to take them out. If anyone has good eyesight, come and take a look." This poor Taoist's demonic tools cost 1 top-grade spirit stone each. Demonic weapons? Top-grade spirit stones? Hearing the dark and thin cultivator's words, Xiao Hua was very surprised and thought he had misheard. However, when he saw the large words in front of the cultivator, he knew that he hadn't misheard. When the cultivators at the side heard this, they all gathered around and each took what they wanted and carefully looked at it. The few Foundation establishment cultivators even released their divine senses and scanned it over and over again. Cough, cough. Fellow cultivators, this is a demonic weapon. Magic power can't be activated, and divine senses can't penetrate it. Why are you using your divine senses? Seeing everyone choose as if they were choosing magic weapons, the dark and thin cultivator couldn't help but frown. He knew that he had come in a hurry today and wouldn't meet any discerning cultivators. Sure enough, those people looked at the demonic artifacts in their hands and coldly glanced at the dark and thin cultivator. Then, they threw away the things in their hands and turned to leave. A few of them walked out of this area, and a few of them went to other stalls. Xiao Hua didn't dare to go forward and only looked at the demonic weapons on the stall with interest. He often heard Zhang Qingxiao talk about the great war between immortals and demons, but he had never seen any demonic weapons. How could he not be curious when he saw one now? However, the demonic weapons on the cultivator's stall were all black, and he couldn't see their quality. If the cultivator didn't say it, Xiao Hua would never know that these unremarkable things were demonic weapons. -5. Chapter 1324. That's right, this demonic tool. Where did it come from? Xiao Hua suddenly came to a realization and said to himself, demonic tools are used by the people of the devil realm. Divine sense and magic power can't be used. What do cultivators like us need them for? Oh, maybe this area is dedicated to selling demonic tools. No wonder there aren't many cultivators here. Xiao Hua already understood the reason for the lack of people, so he turned around to leave. This so-called demonic tool was a bit far away from him, so he didn't need to waste time here. However, the instant Xiao Hua turned around, a powerful divine sense swept over him and scanned him from top to bottom, from inside to outside. Xiao Hua was greatly alarmed and almost stopped. However, He also knew that this was only divine sense and not coercion. A small second-layer chi refining cultivator like him shouldn't have been able to sense it. Therefore, he forcefully suppressed the throbbing in his heart and still turned around, preparing to leave. "Little doll, come over here." A voice sounded as if it was speaking in his ear. Xiaohua was stunned. That voice belonged to the dark and thin cultivator from a moment ago. Why is he looking for me? Xiaohua was baffled and could only stop. Soon after, he looked left and right in bewilderment. Then, he pointed at his nose and asked, Is this senior calling this junior?" "Yes, he's calling you. Apart from you, who else would call you a little doll?" The dark and thin cultivator had an impatient expression. He stretched out his right hand and beckoned with his index finger. He called out, "Quickly come over. This old man has something to tell you." "Yes, this junior will go over right away," Xiaohua replied. He didn't dare to be negligent in the slightest and hurriedly ran in front of that person's stall. He bowed and said, "Senior, I wonder why you called this junior over? First, take off this thing of yours." The dark and thin cultivator coldly said, "What's the use of wearing this thing? This old man can see your true appearance with a single glance. You're just a small second-layer chi refining little doll. What is there that you don't dare to reveal?" Xiaohua was speechless. After thinking for a moment, he obediently took off the camouflage mask and revealed his true appearance. "Sigh, it's just an ordinary face. What are you afraid of? If you really want to cover your face, then go to the 7 Possibilities sex shop and buy a real masking mask. That thing is useless." The dark cultivator nodded. "Senior, please understand. Junior is a rogue cultivator. I'm afraid that if I do something inappropriate and fall into the eyes of others, I'll attract trouble. That's why I thought of this Mi Yong. However, Junior really can't afford the Mi Yong of Qiqiao sect." Xiaohua honestly replied, "Nonsense, of course I know you're a loose cultivator. You're already so old, but you're still in the second layer of chi refining. If you're not a loose cultivator, then what are you? I'm in a great mood today and I like you, so I'll give you a chance. If you can help me with something, I'll tell you my name. In the future, you can use my name to do something. Of course, if your enemy catches you and wants to take your life, you can use my name and maybe they'll let you live." "Oh, right, this time. What do you think?" This. Hearing the dark cultivator's words, Xiaohua knew this matter wouldn't be easy. After thinking for a moment, he cupped his hands and said, "Senior, please tell me. I'll see if I can help." "Whether I can help or not, I can't say. It depends on whether you're willing to help or not." The old man glanced at Xiaohua. "Senior, please speak your mind." "Good. It's actually very simple. I have many demonic tools in my stall. You only need to buy one." Xiaohua was stunned and stammered, "Senior, you're not mistaken, right? Junior, just reached the second layer of chi refining, and I'm a loose cultivator. Why would I want a demonic tool?" "A demonic tool isn't a magic tool. It doesn't require spiritual sense or magic power. It doesn't matter if you're in the second layer of chi refining or middle foundation establishment, you can use it. I only let you pick because I like you." The old man's expression changed. "But won't you consider other people?" Xiaohua turned his head and wanted to point at other people, but just as he raised his head, he was stunned. Just now, there were still several people strolling around this area, but now there was no trace of them. Not even a single hair could be seen. There were only several cultivators with their eyes closed, sitting upright behind their respective stalls. It was unknown whether they were adjusting their breathing or recuperating. Xiaohua was speechless. Who told him to be a second-layer chi refining cultivator? He couldn't outrun them even if he ran. "But, Senior, it's not that I'm being rude. Even if I wanted to buy your demonic tool, I'm just a loose cultivator. How could I take out a supreme-grade spirit stone? To tell the truth, I haven't seen what a supreme-grade spirit stone looks like." Xiaohua said self-mockingly, "You want to see a supreme-grade spirit stone, but supreme-grade spirit stone doesn't want you." The dark and thin old man mocked. "I know you don't have a supreme-grade spirit stone, but since you took out 700 or 800 high-grade spirit stones, I'll let you pick one at will." 700 or 800 high-grade spirit stones? Xiao Hua said in shock. Isn't that 7 or 8 supreme-grade spirit stones? How is it cheap? You ignorant thing. The dark and thin cultivator cursed. 1,000 high-grade spirit stones is only 1 supreme-grade spirit stone. I'm really too lazy to talk to you. Quick, take out all the things in your storage bag. I'll let you pick a demonic tool. Ah, hearing this, Xiao Hua's face turned green. His storage bag contained a lot of spiritual herbs, fireball talismans, forbidden talismans, and some talisman paper, talisman ink, and talisman brushes used to refine yellow talismans. He originally wanted to come to EG to exchange for some good things, but now he regretted it. Why did he put these things in his storage bag? The most important thing was that he did a little calculation. All these things added up were not worth a supreme-grade spirit stone. And even 7 or 800 high-grade spirit stones were not enough. If he took them all out, wouldn't they all be taken away by this dark and thin old man? And what was left for him was nothing more than a demonic tool that was neither good for eating nor drinking, and even more useless. Senior, this junior, indeed has no use for this demonic tool. Xiao Hua's body shrank back. Moreover, the spirit stones in this junior's storage bag will be used for other purposes. Senior, you can't force me to buy or sell, right? Xiao Hua was almost about to cry. He spoke very pitifully. Unfortunately, that dark and thin cultivator was not a person who cherished flowers and cherished the fairer sex. Hearing Xiao Hua's words, his face turned cold, and he said with a smile, of course, how could this old man dare to force you to buy or sell in this Jinghua city? Even if EG's guards didn't say anything, that city lord Lu wouldn't let this old man off. This old man naturally wouldn't dare to make things difficult for you. Xiao Hua's face eased slightly, but thinking about the conversation between this dark and thin cultivator and the Jinghua city disciple just now, Xiao Hua's heart unconsciously thumped, and he secretly said, "It seems he's not that easy to talk to, right?" Sure enough, that old man said unhurriedly. In any case, this old man remembers your face. Unless you live in Jinghua City for the rest of your life and don't take a step out of Jinghua City, otherwise. The old man didn't continue speaking. He merely lowered his head and fiddled with the pitch-black demonic tool on the stall, ignoring Xiao Hua. However, Xiao Hua's face turned pale. This was an undisguised threat, but what could Xiao Hua do? His bewilderment couldn't block the other's divine sense. His true appearance had been seen long ago. Even if he wanted to escape, there was no way to escape. But the problem is, of all the people you could pick, you just had to pick me? Xiao Hua was extremely indignant. After pondering for a while, and seeing that no one else had come, Xiao Hua murmured, Senior, can you leave this junior some spirit stones? Otherwise, this junior won't have a place to stay at night. Bah, this old man's name isn't limited to just supreme-grade spirit stones. You bought a demonic tool that's rarely seen in the Daybreak Continent's cultivation world, and even paid with your life. What's there to be dissatisfied about? You still want this old man to make concessions? Not a chance, the old man said resolutely and decisively. Then, he looked at Xiao Hua's waist and hooked his index finger. Still not going to hurry up and give it to this old man? Xiao Hua used his teeth to bite his lip. He was truly hesitant and unwilling to part with it. However, looking at the old man's cold gaze, he still endured it. He reached out and was just about to take something out of his storage pouch when he heard the old man coldly say, "This old man wants you to give me the entire storage pouch. Don't worry, this old man will only take the things worth 1 supreme-grade spirit stone. I won't touch anything else." Senior, you just said. Xiao Hua wanted to argue that it was 7 or 800 high-grade spirit stones, but just as he said it, he didn't know if it was the old man's gaze or if it was because he felt it was boring. He shut his mouth, took off his storage pouch from his waist, and handed it over. TSK, look at your broken storage pouch. This old man has never seen such a broken and cramped space. No wonder you were embarrassed to take it out. What kind of broken things are these? The dark and thin old man took Xiao Hua's storage pouch and opened it to take a look. He casually took out a few fireball talismans and imprisonment talismans. With a very disdainful expression, he threw them back in. There are actually a few 200-year-old spirit herbs? This is beyond this old man's expectations. Then, the old man took out a few ordinary spirit herbs and casually looked at them. He smiled and said, "All right, little doll. You take a pile of broken yellow talismans and these spirit herbs. There are also a few hundred mid-grade spirit stones to exchange for a demonic tool with this old man." This old man pitied you and reluctantly agreed. "You can choose one." As he spoke, he took all the things in Xiaohua's storage pouch and put them into his own storage pouch. Then, he returned the empty storage pouch to Xiaohua. Looking at the storage pouch that didn't even have a low-grade talisman pin, Xiaohua wanted to cry but had no tears. However, he had already taken out everything. He couldn't just let it go to waste. Xiaohua could only look at the old man's stall with an ashen face. On the stall, the dozen or so demonic tools were very strange, and their shapes were also strange. Xiaohua simply didn't know which one was which. After looking for a moment, the old man became impatient and urged, "Little doll, quickly choose one. This old man still has things to do." Yes, Xiaohua looked at it again, and his gaze fell on a broken spear tip. -5. Chapter 1325. This magic tool was pitch black and very similar to the usual spear tip. However, there was a clear crack at the back of the spear tip, as if it was split from the head of a spear. The reason why Xiaohua's gaze fell on this spear tip was purely because he couldn't see the shape of other magic tools, but this spear tip looked somewhat familiar. When the dark, skinny old man saw Xiaohua's gaze fall on the spear tip, he immediately stretched out his hand and grabbed the spear tip. His hand paused for a moment, and a strange expression appeared on his face. Then he raised his arm and handed the spear tip to Xiaohua and said, "Little kid, did you think of this?" Xiaohua lowered his head and looked at the spear tip in front of him. It was only shining with a dark light, and there was nothing special about it. If the old man didn't say that it was a magic tool, he wouldn't have been able to see it. Xiaohua swept a glance at the spear tip. He was somewhat unwilling and wanted to look at other places. "Enough, little guy. Take this thing. You want to trade this old man's magic tool with your little things. I don't know if you have accumulated good karma in your previous life, but you shouldn't be discontent." The old man coldly threw the spear point towards Xiaohua's hand. Then, with a wave of his hand, all the magic tools in the booth were collected by him. His movements were very fast, and after a flash, all the items were collected by him. Xiaohua was in a hurry to catch the spear point, so he didn't pay attention to where the old man collected the magic tools. Xiaohua's hand just touched the spear tip when a cold feeling passed from the spear tip to his hand and then up his arm. Almost at the same time, his heart also felt cold. What's going on?" Xiaohua was greatly alarmed in his heart. However, just as this astonished thought arose in his mind, the weight of the spear tip suddenly dropped down, causing Xiaohua's hand to loosen. The heavy spear tip actually caused Xiaohua to be caught off guard, causing him to drop it to the ground. "Ha ha ha!" The dark, skinny old man saw this and laughed loudly. His figure flashed across the sky and flew away at a low altitude. Then, a low voice sounded in Xiaohua's ear. "Little kid, this old man is Mingsue Mountain's Shiwuming. You can borrow this name once. This old man acknowledges it." Shiwuming of Mingsue Mountain? Xiaohua was stunned. He had never heard of this name before. When he raised his head to look again, Shiwuming was nowhere to be seen. There were still a few stall owners at the side. They lowered their heads and cultivated with their eyes closed. No one paid any attention to him. "Sigh. I'm so unlucky." Xiaohua sighed and squatted down. He reached out his hand to pick up the spear tip that had fallen to the ground. After all, he had exchanged everything for this spear tip. Even if it was trash, he still had to keep it. The spear tip is so heavy? Xiaohua squatted down and saw clearly that the ground of EG was originally paved with huge bluestone. When the spear tip fell to the ground, it actually smashed the entire bluestone. Of course, the ground of EG had a restriction array. The bluestone on the ground was not really smashed, but the restriction array on the bluestone was broken. When Xiaohua squatted down, The cracked restriction array had already begun to gradually recover. Are you kidding me? Xiao Hua stared dumbfoundedly at the broken restriction array on the ground. How familiar was this situation to him? Wasn't this the result of him using force to break the restriction array? All of a sudden, Xiao Hua's eyes brimmed with fervor. He had a new idea. The sorrow of having been robbed clean of everything had long since been tossed to the highest heavens. His heart was once again filled with joy, disbelief, and shock. Xiao Hua did not immediately pick up the spear tip. Instead, he first maintained his squatting position and looked around. The surrounding situation was the same as before. No one was interested in this unlucky guy. Then, Xiao Hua reached out and grabbed the back half of the spear tip. With a slight force, the spear tip was held in Xiao Hua's hand. No one could see the weight of the spear tip at this time. Then, Xiao Hua clapped his hand without hesitation and threw the spear tip into the storage bag. But just as the spear tip entered, Xiao Hua suddenly felt the storage bag sink. It was very different from when he put things in before. He immediately opened it again and saw that the tip of the spear tip had sunk into the storage bag. He could not see it clearly. Xiao Hua frowned. Needless to say, he already understood that it was not that the spear tip could not be put into the storage bag. It was just that his storage bag was really old. He was afraid that the space inside the storage bag was unstable. The spear tip was really too heavy. If it was placed there for too long, the entire storage bag would be destroyed. Thinking that this was a storage bag that he had exchanged spirit stones for, Xiao Hua immediately felt distressed. He hurriedly raised the storage bag, and with a very hidden movement, he put the spear tip into the space in his mind. Fortunately, there was no change in the space. Damn it, in the future, I can't put anything valuable in the storage bag. I'll just treat it as a cover. Thinking about how he had been robbed by Shi Wuming for no reason, Xiao Hua's heart was bleeding. It was really an unexpected disaster. If he could have put less things in the storage bag, he would have suffered less losses. This old monster, she is really too much. Why did he force a deal without any reason? Why did he have to force someone to sell him a magic tool? Xiao Hua could not help but wonder. Moreover, he only let me know his name. Humph, only a fool would believe that by saying his name, he would be able to escape with his life. Or use his name to do something that doesn't require him to take responsibility. If he was really sincere, he should have at least given me a token or something. Sigh, Xiao Hua did not think about it. No matter what method Shi Wuming used to give him the promise, at least he bought a magic tool that was worth a piece of top-grade spirit stone. Xiao Hua only spent less than a piece of top-grade spirit stone to get the magic tool. He even spared his promise. What a good deal. It was too late to be secretly happy. At this time, the restriction below Xiao Hua's feet was still slowly recovering. Xiao Hua also lost interest in staying here any longer and hurriedly left this place, afraid that he would be stopped by some eccentric senior again. Fortunately, after he put on the concealment mask and left this area, no one stopped him. Although Xiao Hua had lost interest in going inside the EG, his talisman brushes and ink had all been taken away by Shi Wuming. He could only look for another stall to replenish his talisman crafting materials. After searching for a while, he found that this stall seemed to sell yellow talismans. There were not many talisman crafting materials. Just as he was about to turn around and look for his original spot, Xiao Hua's gaze fell on a rather large stall. This stall was surrounded by many cultivators. From time to time, some cultivators would take out spirit stones or other items to exchange with the stall owner. The stall owner was not alone, but a man and a woman. The two of them looked very similar and should be brother and sister. On this stall, there were yellow talismans and medicinal pills. These were all things that Xiao Hua urgently needed. Walking to the front of the stall, Xiao Hua observed. There were not many types of medicinal pills. There were Jiu pill, Emoji pill, smoke feather pill, and so on. They were medicinal pills that could increase magic power, but their effects were slightly inferior to the Peiyuan pill. As for those yellow talismans, they were all Dan guiding talismans, Dan controlling talismans, Dan condensing talismans, Dan collecting talismans, Dan guiding talismans, Dan igniting talismans, 3 Yang talismans, and so on. There were even saltpeter, fire gourd, and other items placed on the side, which were essential for refining medicinal pills. Xiaohua stood still for a moment. He looked at the items that the other cultivators were exchanging and the spirit stones they were taking out. He had a rough idea in his heart. At this time, there was a gap. The female cultivator smiled like a flower and said to Xiaohua, "Fellow Taoist, the medicinal pills that my Imperial Pill School concocts are well known. May I know what kind of pills fellow Taoist wants?" Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist, the prices of these medicinal pills are rather expensive. I also know a little about the art of pill concoction. I only want to buy some necessary yellow talismans, saltpeter, and other items from your school." Fellow Taoist's words are different. The medicinal pills of my humble school are all genuine goods. Moreover, they were all concocted by the elders of my school. Of course, they need the corresponding spirit stones. If fellow Taoist concocts them yourself, it will take a lot of effort and the quality of the medicinal pills won't be good. It would be better to just buy the medicinal pills directly. The female cultivator was not angry and only said softly, "Hee, it's better to teach a man how to fish than to teach him how to fish. Fortunately, it's good to be self-reliant." Xiaohua said, "It's fine. I will prepare a set of yellow talismans and saltpeter for fellow Taoist. I just don't know if fellow Taoist will use spirit stones or items to exchange for them." As the female cultivator said this, she walked to the side and began to pick up the yellow talismans used for pill concoction. "I don't have any spirit stones on me, only some spiritual herbs. Fellow Taoist, please appraise them." Xiaohua said confidently, "Hee, it's best to have spiritual herbs. They're more useful than any spirit stones. What my Imperial Pill School needs to concoct medicinal pills are old spiritual herbs." The female cultivator was not surprised. She smiled and prepared the yellow talismans and saltpeter. "But, fellow Taoist, these spiritual herbs..." The female cultivator straightened her body and asked, "Here, fellow Taoist, please take a look." Just now, there were already cultivators who took out spiritual herbs that were more than 100 years old. Xiaohua's courage grew a bit, and he took out a few spiritual herbs that were more than 200 years old. Alas, Xiaohua had no other choice. He actually wanted to take out some of the younger ones, but the ones in the space behind his head were all planted early on in Yellow Flower Ridge. All of them were around 200 years old. He couldn't reduce them even if he wanted to. Seeing the spiritual herbs in Xiaohua's hand, the female cultivator's eyes lit up. She didn't look very surprised and only praised, "Fellow Taoist, you're indeed skilled in concocting medicinal pills. These spiritual herbs are also old enough. They're the best quality spiritual herbs that my humble sect has seen today." As she said that, she handed over the yellow talismans, saltpeter, and other items in her hand. When Xiaohua took them, he also handed the spiritual herbs to the female cultivator. The female cultivator counted them and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, these spiritual herbs are indeed a bit too much. How about this? I give fellow Taoist some more yellow talismans and saltpeter." "There's no need. Fellow Taoist, if it's cheap, how about I take one of your precious school's medicinal pills?" Xiaohua said with a smile. The female cultivator shook her head. "That won't do. Fellow Taoist, you don't have enough spiritual herbs." "Hee, since that's the case, I can only give my last spiritual herb to fellow Taoist." As Xiaohua said that, he took out another spiritual herb and handed it over. -5. Chapter 1326. With this spiritual herb, although it's still not enough, it's not far from it. The female cultivator was very straightforward. She took the spiritual herb, and without saying anything else, she took out a variety of medicinal pills, put them into a jade bottle, and handed it to Xiaohua. Xiaohua was overjoyed. He reached out to take it, and after thanking her, he hesitated for a moment, then asked tentatively, "Fellow Taoist, I want to ask, does your sect have pill recipes to exchange?" "Pill recipes?" The female cultivator was stunned, and her face immediately froze. She said coldly, "Fellow Taoist, are you joking with me? Pill recipes are the same as cultivation techniques. Every sect treasures them, so who would exchange them for no reason? Since fellow Taoist is also exchanging for pill refinement, Could it be that fellow Taoist also wants to exchange pill recipes? Hee. If fellow Taoist has such intentions, please take them out. My Imperial Pill School will accept them all. Moreover, we'll accept them at all costs. Xiaohua blushed. Fortunately, he was wearing a camouflage cloak, so he wasn't afraid of being seen by others. He turned around and left the stall. The female cultivator didn't pay attention to him. She only thought that Xiaohua was teasing her, so she turned around and greeted the others. Sigh, not only are cultivation techniques hard to find, pill recipes are also hard to find. Although Sect Master has refined the Peiyuan pill before, I only watched from the side and didn't know the details. Even if I had spiritual herbs, I wouldn't have been able to refine it. Xiaohua was somewhat depressed. Being a loose cultivator is indeed very difficult. Fortunately, I've already found a way to cultivate quickly. Coupled with the fact that I can refine yellow talismans, although I'm much slower than ordinary people, at least other people can run while I walk. It's much better than crawling like a snail. Xiaohua comforted himself as he thought. His eyes also looked around. He didn't give up on his evil intentions, hoping for some kind of miracle. Unfortunately, even when the stall was about to end, he still didn't see any words related to pill recipes. Forget it. I'd better exchange for some talisman crafting materials. When I return to the inn later, I still have to craft talismans and cultivate. Xiaohua extinguished his thoughts. He casually stopped at a stall and picked out talisman brushes, talisman ink, and talisman paper. Xiaohua was a bit conflicted. What do you think? They don't want spiritual herbs. They only want spirit stones. Fellow Taoist, you can take I's spiritual grasses and exchange them with other stalls. Why do you want spirit stones? Xiaohua was very puzzled. Fellow Taoist, I'll be returning to the mountain tomorrow to pack up a few things and wait for the trade fair in 10 days. My sect isn't good at concocting pills, so I want fellow Taoist spiritual plants to trade for items. Rather than using spiritual plants to trade for items, it would be better to directly use spirit stones. Could it be that fellow Taoist didn't see this? With that, he pointed. When Xiaohua looked, he saw that it was written very clearly. Spirit stones only. All right. Xiaohua looked at the sky and remembered that there was still a mid-grade spirit stone on the body of the puppet in his space. He had no choice but to conceal it and take out the spirit stone from his space. Looking at the spirit stone Xiaohua handed over, that cultivator shook his head and said, Fellow Taoist, these spirit stones, have you used them before? Yes. Xiaohua didn't deny it and calmly asked, Fellow Taoist, won't you accept these spirit stones? Hee. It's not that I won't accept them, but fellow Taoist should also know that the spiritual energy of the world inside a used spirit stone has already been reduced. It can't be used as a complete spirit stone for exchange. Xiaohua naturally didn't know about this, but he also didn't say anything. He only smiled and said, Then fellow Taoist can just follow the rules. And, although fellow Taoist has used these spirit stones before, the quality is still good. They should be able to be exchanged for 80 low-grade spirit stones. If fellow Taoist feels that it's appropriate, I can deduct the spirit stones used to craft these talismans and exchange the remaining spirit stones for fellow Taoist. After waiting for Xiaohua to nod, that cultivator took out 10 low-grade spirit stones. Xiaohua sweated profusely. Fortunately, he only chose a broken talisman brush. Most of the materials were talisman paper and talisman ink. This incomplete mid-grade spirit stone could still be used. Xiaohua received the spirit stones and hurriedly returned to the inn. At this moment, he didn't have any spirit stones in his storage pouch, and the inn didn't allow people to owe money. Tomorrow, Xiaohua had to bring back some mid-grade spirit stones to continue the account. Although there were spiritual plants in the space, wouldn't it take a lot of time to obtain them? If he exchanged them, then there would be one less. It was far cheaper to refine yellow talismans, a method that could be used to cultivate and exchange for spirit stones. After entering the inn's room, Xiaohua opened the restriction. After adjusting his breathing for a moment, he began to refine yellow talismans. First, he made several fireball talismans, then several confinement talismans. When Xiaohua once again dipped his 10 fingers in talisman ink and prepared to refine the fireball talismans, his heart suddenly stirred. He inwardly said, The talismans used to refine the fireball talismans are simple. The amount of magic power used is also small, but the amount of spiritual chi of heaven and earth wrapped in it is also small. When refining the confinement talismans, the talismans are complex, and the amount of magic power and spiritual chi of heaven and earth used is also extremely large. But why did I use the same amount of talisman ink? Could it be that when refining yellow talismans, the amount of talisman ink used can also be reduced? Other talisman masters probably wouldn't think of this kind of idea. They only thought of how to perfectly refine yellow talismans, how to use more talisman ink to draw more spiritual chi of heaven and earth into the yellow talismans. They didn't care about using more talisman ink. But our Xiaohua, he was born stingy. Moreover, he was embarrassingly short of money today, so he had no choice but to instinctively consider this kind of matter. Xiaohua was most willing to do things that were frugal. He very carefully controlled his magic power and used the least amount of talisman ink possible to wrap the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Sure enough, it was just as Xiaohua thought. The amount of talisman ink could really be reduced. Xiaohua tried a dozen times, until the amount of talisman ink he could use was just barely enough to wrap the spiritual chi of heaven and earth onto the talisman paper. Only then did he stop. When he turned back and carefully calculated, he shockingly discovered that the talisman ink that could only refine 10 fireball talismans in the past, he could actually refine 13 of them now. The amount of talisman ink he could use had increased by 30%. Moreover, when Xiaohua regulated his breathing, he discovered that his magic power had increased by a lot compared to before, and his control of magic power had become more precise. Although the increase in magic power wasn't much, to Xiaohua, any increase meant that he could catch up with the cultivation speed of others a little bit. How could he not be happy? In the midst of his joy, Xiaohua suddenly thought, E-market will be in 10 days. At that time, there will be even more people coming, and there will also be a lot of things that can be used. It seems that I have to refine more yellow talismans. Perhaps I can exchange them for a lot of spiritual stones. That's right, at that time. The spiritual grass can also be exchanged for a good price. That won't do. On the day of E-market, there will definitely be people from the 100 Herbs Gate. If I take out the spiritual grass, it might attract the attention of the 100 Herbs Gate disciples. Although I have the mystic grass, it can't change its shape or hide its cultivation, so I will still be easily recognized by the 100 Herbs Gate. This spiritual grass, I absolutely can't reveal it. Xiaohua unconsciously came to a realization. Perhaps this E-market is already not bad, so it's better not to go to E-market. Xiaohua thought for a moment, but couldn't make up his mind, so he simply stopped thinking about it. He only focused on refining confinement talismans, using all his intelligence and wisdom on the great frugal research of how to use the least amount of talisman ink to attach the most amount of spiritual chi of heaven and earth. It was said that there was no time in cultivation, and refining yellow talismans and earning spiritual stones also had no time. In the blink of an eye, Xiaohua was immersed in refining yellow talismans, taking them to E-market to exchange for spiritual stones, talisman papers, and other things, cultivating. He almost forgot that he still had to join Tianqi. The confinement talismans refined by Xiaohua weren't as good as the fireball talismans he refined. They could only be considered as middle-grade talismans, and there was still a certain gap between them and high-grade talismans. But even so, it still allowed him to earn several hundred middle-grade spiritual stones. After all, that was a high-grade confinement talisman, and middle-grade confinement talismans were also very popular in E-market. Even Xiaohua almost thought of setting up a stall in E-market himself. It's just that Xiaohua didn't see He Zhengyu and Ling Zhengyu for the past few days, and there was no suitable person to ask at E-Bazaar either. Only then did he put down his thoughts, and these two people probably left Jinghua City to prepare for E-City. I've stayed in Jinghua City for so many days. Why is there still no news from Tianqi? Xiaohua walked in front of E-market on this day, and suddenly thought, the middle-grade spiritual stone that Senior Qing gave me, I'm afraid it's already been used up? Could it be there's no chance of joining Tianqi? Thinking about it, it was also very possible. The cultivation method is gone. The pill formula is probably also gone. Xiaohua was a little disappointed, and he couldn't help but have an impulse to send out the summoning talisman. But before his hand touched his ear, he stopped. Relying on others alone, this cultivation will always be dependent. Other individual cultivators can survive and improve their cultivation. Why can't I? It's that 1,000 feet old man, right? I heard from the sect master that he could cultivate to the gold core realm, so why can't I? Now I still have a cultivation method for the second layer of the aura refining realm to use, and I still have a lot of time to find a cultivation method. I don't believe I can't walk a path to heaven on my own. Xiaohua's harvest these days filled him with confidence in cultivation, and it was also true. Xiaohua refined yellow talismans every day, comprehended the heavenly Tao, and comprehended cultivation methods. His cultivation increased a little every day, and it was indeed much stronger than when he was in Shanghuaming. Moreover, from the looks of it, as long as he had a source of spiritual stones, there was nothing wrong with living in this inn for a year or so. However, the path of cultivation was very long, so how could he just stay in an inn? Forget it. I'd better earn some spiritual stones first. After all, Tianqi didn't give me a final word. Maybe they still haven't gathered enough talisman masters. Xiaohua shook his head, then strode towards Yi. As soon as he entered, a fourth-layer aura refining cultivator turned around from an extremely distant corner. He stared at Xiaohua's back for a long time before quickly chasing after him. Xiaohua had been a little careless these days. Moreover, that cultivator was really far away. Even if Xiaohua stopped to watch, he might not be able to see anything. When Xiaohua entered Yi, he was very familiar with the way. He didn't stop at the nearby stalls and directly walked into Yi. Although Xiaohua was a little relaxed outside Yi, he was still cautious inside. He tried his best not to go to any stalls that he had already been to. There were many similar stalls in Yi, so he didn't have to worry about finding a suitable stall. -5. Chapter 1327. Xiaohua first found a stall and bought a lot of talisman ink and talisman paper. Then he didn't stop at all and went to other places. Xiaohua bought mid-grade talisman paper and low-grade talisman ink. Although the quantity wasn't small, he could absolutely not attract the attention of others. Through Xiaohua's experiments these past few days, he found that no matter if it was high-grade talisman ink or mid-grade talisman ink, the fireball talismans he refined were all high-grade. It had nothing to do with talisman ink or talisman paper. However, if he used low-grade talisman paper, he could only refine low-grade confinement talismans. If he used mid-grade or high-grade talisman paper, he could refine mid-grade confinement talismans. Therefore, Xiaohua naturally tried to be as frugal as possible and used the least amount of spirit stones to refine the most yellow talismans. After walking for a while, Xiaohua suddenly felt a little strange, and his footsteps slightly stagnated. When he turned a corner, he slightly turned his head to take a look. There were many cultivators behind Xiaohua. Some were foundation establishment cultivators, some were aura refining cultivators, some were covering their faces, and some were swaggering. However, these people were all looking at the stall, and no one paid any attention to him. A little cultivator who looked like he was only at the second layer of the aura refining realm. Even if he covered his face, no one would be suspicious. Strange, could it be that I didn't rest well these past few days? Xiaohua frowned and muttered inwardly. Then, with a flash, he went in another direction. After a while, Xiaohua's figure appeared in front of a small yellow talisman stall. Most of the stall was already empty, and there were only a few fireball talismans, ice talismans, and so on. A dark and thin old man was sitting there with his hands hanging down, seemingly bored to death. At this moment, Xiaohua was very familiar with this place. He stepped forward and cupped his hands. "Fellow Taoist, please." Fellow Taoist, what can I do for you?" The dark and thin old man seemed to understand Xiaohua's meaning and returned the greeting with a smile. "Fellow Taoist, please take a look at this confinement talisman. What do you think?" As he spoke, Xiaohua handed over a confinement talisman. The dark, skinny old man nodded as he received it. After carefully looking at it, he nodded slightly and said, "Not bad. It's already very rare and commendable for such a high-level confinement talisman to be refined to such an extent. In my opinion, it should be above the middle grade." "All right, I wonder if fellow Taoist wants to buy it? Xiao Hua was secretly delighted. The old man looked at his empty stall and smiled. Of course. Since fellow Taoist came to find this poor Taoist, it means that you have good intentions. How could this poor Taoist let fellow Taoist down? Please make a bid, fellow Taoist. Xiao Hua didn't beat around the bush. He felt a trace of uneasiness in his heart. Well, a middle-grade, high-grade yellow talisman usually costs 120 low-grade spirit stones. I'm sure you know that. If you're willing, I'll pay 100 low-grade spirit stones. What do you think? The old man said sincerely. Fellow Taoist. Xiao Hua's expression was unreadable, but his tone was full of regret. He said, I walked all the way here and already saw the market clearly. If it wasn't for the fact that I didn't want to go any further, why would I stop in front of fellow Taoist's stall? Fellow Taoist, you must be fated to give me such a low price. This really hurts. How much do you think is appropriate? The old man's expression didn't change. Normally, I'll pay 140 low-grade spirit stones. Who told I to be fated with you? How about 130? Xiao Hua said without any trace of politeness. Hee, fellow Taoist, I can't take advantage of fellow Taoist's price. I can't agree. If fellow Taoist really wants to make a move, then 110 low-grade spirit stones. The old man looked at Xiao Hua and said in a low voice, I know the origin of fellow Taoist spirit stones. If fellow Taoist agrees, I will give fellow Taoist some benefits. Xiao Hua pretended to ponder and said awkwardly, Fellow Taoist, you're making things difficult for I. My bottom line is 120 low-grade spirit stones. If it's less, I won't be able to report back. Then forget it. The old man waved his hand and said, Your bottom line is too high. I can't deal with it. Fellow Taoist, please go to the side and take a look. Oh, okay. Xiao Hua nodded and said with a smile, Then fellow I's 200 or so middle-grade yellow talismans will benefit others. What? 200 or so talismans? The old man became anxious when he heard this and said, fellow Taoist, you said we were fated. Why didn't you say so earlier? I want all of these yellow talismans. Don't. Fellow I's yellow talismans are 125 low-grade spirit stones each. Fellow Taoist, don't mishear. Xiao Hua's voice was a bit hoarse. 125? The old man was stunned when he heard this, but then he said with a smile, There's nothing to say. Fellow Taoist, we're fated. I accept this price. The old man was very clear that most of the talismans in EG were 5 elements yellow talismans. High-grade confinement talismans like this were still too few. If there were confinement talismans in his stall, not to mention that each one could be sold for 150 low-grade spirit stones, there would be many people buying confinement talismans along with 5 elements yellow talismans. Then, fellow Taoist, please prepare the spirit stones. Xiao Hua said with a smile, I have 230 confinement talismans. Okay, it should be 287 middle-grade spirit stones and 50 low-grade spirit stones. I'll sell it to you for 290 middle-grade spirit stones. I don't know if fellow Taoist wants middle-grade spirit stones or high-grade spirit stones. The old man said very quickly, I'll take middle-grade spirit stones. I won't be able to share high-grade spirit stones with senior brothers when I go back. Xiao Hua nodded. Okay, the old man said while dividing the spirit stones in the storage bag. He said with a smile, Fellow Taoist, you have so many yellow talismans. Actually, you can also occupy a stall yourself. Xiao Hua's heart moved, but he immediately waved his hand and said, I'm just running errands. I don't care about anything else. Occupying a stall is a bit troublesome. It's easy to attract attention. Ha, fellow Taoist, you're thinking too much. The old man reached out and took the storage bag Xiao Hua handed over. He put all the spirit stones inside, then took the confinement talismans Xiao Hua handed over. He said with a smile, You only need to pay Jingwa City a low-grade spirit stone every day. Anyone can set up a stall here. Fellow Taoist, you're wearing camouflage clothing. Who would know who you are? That's true, Xiao Hua said with a smile, but he immediately took the storage bag and waved his hand, saying, I still have to cultivate more. I don't have the time to deal with this. Hee. Since fellow Taoist doesn't want to do it, if these yellow talismans are cheap in the future, come and give them to I. The old man cupped his hands and said. Xiaohua didn't immediately answer. He lowered his head and pondered. He looked back several times and didn't see any eyesores. Then, he raised his head and said with a smile, if fellow Taoist has some pill recipes here that you can provide to I can naturally consider it. Alas, fellow Taoist, you're asking for too much. The old man smiled bitterly. My Yin Xing sect only uses yellow talismans to maintain. We don't have pill recipes. Fellow Taoist, you're really making things difficult for I. Xiaohua didn't say anything. He cupped his hands and was about to leave. The old man said again, however, there are many cultivators on the day of the exchange. Fellow Taoist, you can come and take a look with your sect's senior brothers. Maybe you can come across some ordinary pill recipes. Thank you, fellow Taoist. Xiaohua nodded and left. After waiting for a while, Xiaohua nimbly hid in a remote place. He stuck out half of his head and stared at the yellow talisman stall just now. He saw that there weren't many people in front of the stall just now. After the old man wrote a few words, the number of people patronizing the stall also increased. However, after the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, those people gradually dispersed. Among them, there wasn't anyone that could attract Xiaohua's attention. It's really strange. Could it be that I'm a bird frightened by the twang of a bough? Xiaohua was depressed. Just as he was about to turn around, he heard a rather familiar voice in front of him shouting, this is just an ordinary jade pendant. How dare you ask for a piece of top-grade spirit stone? Xiaohua was greatly surprised. He looked as far as he could and saw a group of people surrounding a stall. The voice was coming from there. Xiaohua, who quickly walked over to take a look, didn't expect that right after he left the stall, a cultivator dressed in camouflage clothes would walk over and point at the words written by the dark-skinned cultivator. He said in a hoarse voice, fellow Taoist, you actually have a confinement talisman here. You didn't seem to have one just now, right? The dark and thin old man said with a smile, I didn't have one just now, but that doesn't mean I don't have one now. I don't know if fellow Taoist needs it. This is comparable to a high-grade confinement talisman. I only sell it for 160 low-grade spirit stones. The price can be considered okay, but I want more. Do you have enough confinement talismans in your house? The dark and thin old man didn't doubt him and said with a smile, I have a lot of them waiting for the day of the exchange. If fellow Taoist really wants them, I'll give you 10 low-grade spirit stones for each yellow talisman. I have more than 200 talismans here. The cultivator was clearly somewhat shocked and almost couldn't believe it. What? Do you think I's price is too high? The dark and thin old man sneered. It will be the exchange market in a few days. I'm afraid the price of this confinement talisman will rise to 2 mid-grade spirit stones. If fellow Taoist doesn't make a move now, it will be over when the time comes. And at this time, there were also several cultivators who were attracted by the black-armed old man's handwriting and walked over. Let's think about it again. That cultivator was somewhat hesitant, but the dark and thin old man didn't care and turned to greet the others. That cultivator stood for a moment and followed the few cultivators who left. Although Xiaohua was watching from afar, how could he know the conversation? Even if he heard it? What could he know? How could he possibly know that under that bewilderment, there was a face filled with greed whispering, 150 low-grade spirit stones for a confinement talisman and 2 white-yellow talismans. Then, how many spirit stones would that be? This guy has been continuously appearing in the exchange market for many days, I'm afraid. Could it be that there are already a few top-grade spirit stones in that storage pouch? That cultivator was also cautious. After leaving the stall, he didn't turn back and didn't look in the direction where Xiaohua left. After walking for a long time, he turned back and looked around. Xiaohua heard a familiar voice and walked towards the crowd. When he got closer, he saw a person standing in front of a stall with a mess of things. He couldn't help but feel strange. -5. Chapter 1328. Standing in front of the stall was a boy about 10 years old. It was the Xuanyin school's disciple that Xiao Hua saw outside Jingpa City and was mocked the first time he came to Yi. The current boy was far from the arrogant Xiao Hua saw. His face was flushed with anger, and there was a trace of stubbornness and sorrow in his eyes. Looking at his hand, he was holding an extremely ordinary-looking jade pendant. Fellow Taoist, although your cultivation is higher than I's, you can't force a trade. I already told fellow Taoist that this is a jade talisman, not an ordinary jade pendant. If fellow Taoist wants to trade, you can take out a top-grade spirit stone or something of equivalent value. As long as I is satisfied, I will definitely fulfill fellow Taoist's request. The stall owner was a tall man with a pink and white face. He was about 27 or 28 years old, but his cultivation was only at the 3rd level of Qi refinement. You rogue cultivator, are unreasonable. Although I haven't seen a jade talisman, I know about the so-called yellow talismans, spirit talismans, and jade talismans. Your jade pendant doesn't have the slightest bit of spiritual energy. How can it be a jade talisman? The boy said hurriedly, his voice trembling. Fellow Taoist, it's true that I am a rogue cultivator, but who said that rogue cultivators can't have jade talismans? Jade talismans themselves have runes, so of course they don't have spiritual energy of heaven and earth? Is there a need for I to say this to fellow Taoist? Who knows if fellow Taoist was sleeping when fellow Taoist's teacher was teaching? The rogue cultivator said without any trace of politeness. Ha ha ha, when the surrounding crowd heard this, they all laughed loudly. I am a disciple of Xuanyin School. My Xuanyin School's rules are very strict. Who dares to slack off when the teacher is teaching? The boy defended himself. Xuanyin School? The rogue cultivator was slightly stunned, then laughed. I only said it was possible. I never said that your school wasn't. Fellow Taoists, you can all testify. Of course, we all heard it. A busybody said loudly, I may not have seen a jade talisman, but I swear on my status as a disciple of Xuanyin School that this is truly an ordinary jade pendant, and definitely not some jade talisman. The boy said through gritted teeth, Fellow Taoist, since this jade talisman belongs to I, and I say it's a jade talisman, then it's a jade talisman. Even if it's not a jade talisman, if I want a top-quality spirit stone, then it's worth a top-quality spirit stone. If fellow Taoist wants it, then pay a top-quality spirit stone first. The rogue cultivator was still arrogant as he laughed. The boy looked at the jade pendant in his hand. His hands were trembling as he shouted, I won't give it to you. What are you going to do? Fellow Taoists, take a look. This is how Xuanyin School's disciples do things. Xuanyin School's disciples are bullying others. Xuanyin School's disciples are stealing other people's jade talismans. That rogue cultivator immediately cried out in horror. You shut up. The boy stomped his foot, and the red flush on his face receded, replaced by an ashen expression. How many spirit stones do you want? I definitely don't have that many top-quality spirit stones. The boy whispered, it's fine if you don't have spirit stones. Let's see what fellow Taoist has in his storage pouch. As long as it's worth spirit stones. The rogue cultivator narrowed his eyes and said, There are things in my storage pouch that belong to my school. I can't let you see it. The boy said firmly. So it's like that. The rogue cultivator's eyes darted around. He clapped his hands, and a silenced talisman appeared. The two of them began to talk. If fellow Taoist doesn't have spirit stones, you can use your school's cultivation method to exchange for it. No one else will know. I will definitely not tell anyone. The rogue cultivator knew that there was a silenced talisman, but he still said softly. When the boy heard this, he shook his head. No, that's absolutely impossible. Then, I will take a step back. Xuanyin School is the leading school of alchemy in the country of Xi. If fellow Taoist has your school's pay-you-on pill, foundation establishment pill, and the like, take out a dozen of them. I will exchange this jade talisman with you. Pay-you-on pill, foundation establishment pill? A dozen of them? The boy smiled bitterly. Fellow Taoist, you're daydreaming. Do you think I will have them? Then there's no other way. The rogue cultivator spread out his hands helplessly. These are all things I need. I don't need anything else. Fellow Taoist, please return the jade talisman to I. As he spoke, the rogue cultivator stretched out his hand. The boy took half a step back and hid the jade talisman behind him. Oh, right. I almost forgot. If fellow Taoist has your school's pill formula, take out 2. It should be fine. The rogue cultivator casually looked behind the boy and suddenly said, Pill formula? The boy's eyes lit up. He thought for a moment and said, Will an incomplete pill formula do? What kind of pill formula? The rogue cultivator's eyes lit up even more as he smiled. The boy shook his head. I don't know. It's just an incomplete. Hee. Then I'm very sorry. The rogue cultivator waved his hand and removed the silence talisman. He said loudly, Since fellow Taoist isn't willing, then hand over the jade talisman. Perhaps someone else can afford a supreme-grade spirit stone. At this moment, a cultivator wearing a Taoist robe and camouflage walked over from behind the boy. He bowed and said, Fellow Taoist, is this really a jade talisman? Can you let I take a look? Of course, but the jade talisman is in the hands of this Xuanyan cult disciple. He doesn't want to return it to I. The rogue cultivator smiled bitterly at the boy. Oh, Xuanyan cult is a major cult in the country of Xi. Their disciples would definitely not be so rude. I believe this fellow Taoist is in urgent need of this jade talisman. The cultivator said gently, I wonder if this fellow Taoist can let I take a look? The boy looked at the cultivator. After a long while, he raised the jade talisman. However, he still held it in his hand and refused to let go. I see. The cultivator looked carefully for a moment and nodded slightly. He asked, Fellow Taoist, do you not have a supreme-grade spirit stone? The boy nodded. Seeing this, the cultivator took his storage bag and handed it to the rogue cultivator. He smiled and said, Fellow Taoist, this is I's storage bag. Fellow Taoist can take a look. Although it is not worth a supreme-grade spirit stone, it is not much different. Without waiting for the cultivator to finish speaking, the rogue cultivator took the bag and opened it. He smiled and said, It is. Could it be that fellow Taoist wants this jade talisman? That is indeed the case. I like this thing very much, and am prepared to exchange the items in the storage bag for this jade talisman. The cultivator said slowly, Fellow Taoist, this is just an ordinary jade talisman, not a jade talisman. You must not be fooled. The boy was very anxious and shouted, Haha, fellow Taoist, the items in the storage bag belong to this poor Taoist. This poor Taoist can do whatever he wants with it. This poor Taoist likes this jade talisman, so it's normal for me to exchange it for it. The cultivator smiled and said, Fellow Taoist, please give this poor Taoist the jade talisman. This. The boy bit his lips with his teeth and was very hesitant. Sigh, fellow Taoist, if no one came to exchange, I could have negotiated with you. Since there is someone who knows the value of this jade talisman, fellow Taoist, please return the jade talisman to I. Xuanyan sect is a large sect and has a good reputation. You must not ruin your reputation because of such a small matter. The rogue cultivator persuaded. But the boy was very hesitant. Oh, if fellow Taoist likes it, of course you can take out a corresponding amount of spirit stones to exchange with this fellow Taoist. After all, fellow Taoist saw this talisman before I. If fellow Taoist takes out spirit stones now, I will not be able to compete with fellow Taoist. Fellow Taoist, can you give me 2 days? I will go to my fellow Taoist to gather some spirit stones. The boy begged. The rogue cultivator glanced and shook his head. I could have done it, but I am afraid it is not possible now. Sure enough, that cultivator smiled and said, If fellow Taoist does not have spirit stones, it is better that you give the jade talisman to I. I am still in a hurry to return to the mountain. But when the boy heard this, his face was extremely ugly. He clenched his little fists and finally gritted his teeth and shouted, Okay. As he spoke, he was about to untie the storage bag at his waist. Seeing this, the rogue cultivator's eyes revealed joy. At this moment, a figure walked over quickly and grabbed the boy's wrist, berating, You boy, why are you wasting time here? Our senior brothers have been waiting for you for a long time. Hurry up and come with me. That boy was shocked at first because his wrist was grabbed because of his uneasiness. Then, when he heard the berating, his face turned ashen. However, when he saw the appearance of the person who came, his face became extremely shocked again and he shouted, "You are?" Before he could finish speaking, an irresistible force tightened around his wrist, and a sharp pain came from his wrist. Ouch, ouch. The boy could not help but cry out. Who was it? Of course it was Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua first looked at the boy talking to the rogue cultivator with interest. Like many of the cultivators around him, he was a bystander and had long known that the rogue cultivator raised the price because the boy had taken a fancy to the jade pendant and showed that he had a certain relationship with the jade pendant. At first, Xiao Hua did not have the intention to help. After all, the other party was a famous sect and had treated him coldly twice. He had no reason to use his warm face to stick to the other parties, but later, when he saw another cultivator stand up and want the ordinary jade pendant, Xiao Hua knew that this person was on the same side as the rogue cultivator. He immediately thought of what happened to Xiao Xinruwei, Gong Mingwei, and Zhang Qingxiao at the E-market last time and felt pity for them. When he saw that the boy actually wanted to open the storage pouch, he was even more shocked. With his knowledge, there was definitely more than just spirit stones and medicinal pills inside the storage pouch. Otherwise, seeing how important the jade pendant was to the boy would have already changed and would not have waited until now. And now, the boy had been deceived by the two people and had lost his mind. If there really was something in the storage pouch that Sun Yan taught him, then the boy would have taken the jade pendant, but what about his own life? Suddenly, Xiao Hua could not stand still. The rogue cultivator on his left and right was only a third-layer qi refining cultivator. Although the other cultivator was wearing a camouflage robe and he could not see their cultivation level, he was afraid that they would not exceed the fourth layer of qi refining. Even if Xiao Hua could not beat them, he could still escape. Therefore, he quickly stepped forward and grabbed the boy's wrist. -5. Chapter 1329. Xiao Hua took advantage of that Xuanyan schoolboy's restless state to grab his wrist. Xiao Hua didn't think too much about it, but as soon as his hand touched that boy's wrist, his fingers immediately moved slightly. His hand exerted force, causing half of the boy's body to go limp and numb. He could only cry out in shock. "You are?" Afterwards, he couldn't say anything else. "Humph, if I wasn't here, wouldn't you have made a mistake?" Xiao Hua said coldly. "Why aren't you quickly returning the item?" As he said this, his right hand brushed past the boy's wrist that was holding the jade pendant. As if struck by lightning, the boy's hand loosened. Xiao Hua took the jade pendant and threw it to that cultivator who came later. He said with a sneer, "Since fellow Taoist has taken a fancy to this item and my junior martial brother doesn't have enough spirit stones, of course he'll give it to fellow Taoist." Then, he turned to that individual cultivator and said coldly, "Although my junior martial brother is young and inexperienced, he's still a disciple of Xuanyan school. He won't be deceived by others." That individual cultivator's face was filled with shock, but he still defended himself. "Fellow Taoist, I have a real jade talisman, humph." How could Xiao Hua say anything more to him? If it wasn't for the fact that he had to pretend and say a few polite words, he would have already pulled the boy away. However, just as he was about to leave, that boy didn't know what he was thinking and struggled with all his might. Unfortunately, the boy's strength was too weak. Xiao Hua's hand was like cast iron and didn't move at all. The boy couldn't help but blush and shout, "Who the hell are you?" Xiao Hua was very anxious. He reached out and slapped the boy's face. He berated, "Don't talk too much. Wait until we return to the mountain and I'll settle accounts with you. You dare hit me." The boy was stunned. Although Xiao Hua held back, there was still a 5-finger mark left on the boy's face. It was extremely obvious. Xiao Hua didn't dare to stop. Taking advantage of the boy's daze, he pulled the boy up from the ground and quickly walked outside. As he walked, he scolded, "Everyone, disperse. What's there to see?" The surrounding people saw Xiao Hua grab the fourth-layer qi refining boy and slap him across the face. The boy didn't even have a chance to resist, so of course they wouldn't take Xiao Hua's second-layer qi refining level seriously. When they heard Xiao Hua's reprimand, they all hurriedly stepped aside and gradually dispersed. Xiao Hua walked very fast. He was familiar with the surroundings. After turning a few corners and seeing that there was no one around, he looked back and saw that there was no one around. Seeing that there was no one around, he quickly let go of his hand. The boy was still dizzy from the beating. He had just woken up when Xiao Hua let go of his hand. The soreness and numbness in his body also disappeared, and his hands and feet regained their freedom. The boy immediately jumped up and cursed, "You shameless loose cultivator! You actually dared to disturb this young master's business. You actually dared to beat this young master. If this young master doesn't take your life, then this young master's surname isn't Xiao." As he spoke, the boy slapped his storage pouch and took out several yellow talismans. "Fellow Taoist, you must not make a mistake. This is Jinghua City's e.g. If you dare to attack, how can the disciples of Jinghua City forgive you? Even if you're a disciple of Xuanyan School, I'm afraid you won't have a good end." Xiao Hua was greatly alarmed and hastily retreated. The boy's yellow talisman had already been activated, but after hearing Xiao Hua's words, he immediately realized that fighting was prohibited in Jinghua City. This was something his master had instructed him to do before he left the mountain. Wouldn't his yellow talisman immediately provoke endless trouble? "Humph, this young master knows you. Just wait and see." The boy angrily put away the yellow talisman and said, "I know you're a loose cultivator abandoned by the heavens. One day you'll definitely, fellow Taoist, I's good intentions have been taken as ill intent by you. Could it be that you've really been blinded by lard? Didn't you see that the stall owner was in cahoots with the cultivator who came later?" Xiao Hua smiled wryly. He had no choice but to stop and explain. "If you don't believe me, go back and find your senior brother. Have him look again and you'll know." Huh? The boy wasn't stupid. It was just that when he was in the middle of the situation just now, his mind had reached a dead end. Now that he thought about it, how could he not know? He couldn't help but cry out in alarm. His forehead was covered with sweat, and his small hand naturally went to protect the storage pouch at his waist. "All right, since fellow Taoist knows, I'll leave first. Fellow Taoist has the protection of your sect, so you don't need to be afraid of being targeted. I, however, am very afraid." Xiao Hua cupped his hands in salute and turned to leave. The boy clenched his teeth and opened his mouth as if to call out to Xiao Hua, but not a single word came out. At this moment, a drawn-out voice was heard. "What? You beat up a disciple of my Xuanyan school and want to leave so easily?" When Xiao Hua heard this, he was greatly alarmed. His legs were somewhat weak, and his figure stopped in place. He didn't know whether he should escape or not. "Senior brother." Behind Xiao Hua, the boy called out timidly, his pleasant surprise mixed with fear. "Sigh." Xiao Hua wailed from the bottom of his heart and turned around. Right behind the boy, a cultivator dressed in camouflage slowly walked over. That cultivator walked closer and reached out to take off the camouflage, revealing his true appearance. It was precisely that Xuanyan School's 11th level Qi refinement cultivator that Xiao Hua saw outside Jinghua City. "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Xiao Hua didn't dare to approach and cupped his hands in salute. That cultivator ignored him and walked in front of the boy. He said coldly, "Xiao Mao, do you know your wrongs?" "Senior brother, disciple. Disciple knows his wrongs." The boy named Xiao Mao shrunk his neck and bowed. "What wrongs?" "Disciple. Shouldn't have argued with other cultivators over a small thing," Xiao Mao said in a low voice. "Is that all?" Xiao Mao's senior brother snorted coldly and said, "You've been wandering around Yi City these past few days, and I have been following you. Even the matter just now, I also saw it clearly. Do you think I don't know what's in your storage pouch?" With a plop, Xiao Mao knelt on the ground and rushed to say, "Senior brother, that jade pendant is disciples." Xiao Mao's senior brother interrupted him and said coldly, "I don't care what that jade pendant is. Even if you gave all your spirit stones and medicinal pills to others, I still wouldn't care. I just wanted to see if you would really give the things in your storage pouch to others." At this point, Xiao Mao's senior brother glanced at Xiao Hua. "Fortunately, your luck isn't bad. There was actually someone who helped you. Otherwise, your fate, do you know?" "Disciple. Disciple knows. Disciple also doesn't know why, but Disciple was bewitched at that time." Xiao Mao didn't dare to get up and said in a low voice, "It's good that you know. This time, you left the mountain to gain experience, and your results didn't pass. After returning to the mountain, I will tell your master the result. When you return today, you and the other senior brothers will first return to Xuanyin Mountain." After Xiao Mao's senior brother finished speaking, he looked at Xiao Hua and asked, "This person is the heaven-forsaken loose cultivator you spoke of? Seeing that you didn't resist, you know him?" "Disciple, can't be considered to know him. We just met when we entered the city. At that time, he was right in front of us." Xiao Mao replied with a depressed expression. "Oh?" Xiao Mao's senior brother was slightly surprised. He raised his eyes and said, "Fellow Taoist, don't you want to take down the bewitching insect?" Sigh. Hearing this, Xiao Hua still sighed in his heart and took down the bewitching insect. "Oh, it's you." Xiao Mao's senior brother clearly also had an impression of Xiao Hua. "I am Zhuo Qingyuan of Xuanyin Mountain. How should I address fellow Taoist? I am Xiao Hua. Greetings, fellow Taoist Zhuo." Xiao Hua cupped his hands. "Xiao Hua? Xiao Mao?" Zhuo Qingyuan asked curiously, "You know Xiao Mao? But what's the connection?" Xiao Hua shook his head. "I am just a loose cultivator. How can I know a disciple of Xuanyin Mountain? It's all just a coincidence." "Hee, coincidence? Do you think I will believe that?" Zhuo Qingyuan had a pensive look on his face. "With your low cultivation, you actually dared to step forward bravely. If you have nothing to do with Xiao Mao, then how is this possible?" "Sigh. I just saw a little boy like him being bullied and felt indignant in my heart. I don't have any other thoughts," Xiao Hua said with a bitter smile. "Could it be that you didn't see him as a disciple of Xuanyin Mountain and wanted to curry favor with Xuanyin Mountain? Or perhaps you want to obtain some benefits from Xiao Mao?" Xiao Hua's eyes turned and he said with a smile, "If fellow Taoist Zhuo has such thoughts, I naturally welcome them. I wonder how fellow Taoist will thank I? What benefits does fellow Taoist want to obtain? Naturally, it's what loose cultivators want." Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes and said calmly, "Ha ha ha, then what's the difference between fellow Taoist and those two loose cultivators just now?" Zhuo Qingyuan laughed loudly. "Could it be that there aren't two people in this trap, but three? I only have one person in this trap. Where did two people come from? Three people?" Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said, "If fellow Taoist doesn't have any techniques or the like to thank I will pretend I didn't hear it. Farewell." Finished speaking, Xiao Hua turned around and prepared to leave. Unexpectedly, Zhuo Qingyuan sneered and said, "How can my Xuanyin Mountain's disciple be bullied by others as they wish? Even though fellow Taoist redeemed my Xuanyin Mountain's reputation and can be considered to have saved my junior brother's life, you slapped my Xuanyin Mountain's disciple's face. Do you want to leave so easily?" "You." Xiao Hua stared blankly and argued, This isn't." Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Xiao Hua only felt a cold wind in front of him. Without waiting for him to react, the image of a palm swatted over. Xiao Hua was greatly alarmed and hurriedly dodged. However, Zhuo Qingyuan was an 11th level Qi refining cultivator. Compared to Xiao Hua's cultivation, Zhuo Qingyuan's was more than a star and half a drop higher. How could Xiao Hua dodge in such a hurry? With a pa sound, Xiao Hua did his utmost to dodge, but that palm still brushed against Xiao Hua's cheek a little less than half. Your magic power seems to be higher than the second level of Qi refining?" Zhuo Qingyuan cried out in alarm. Even though he didn't really use all of his magic power, he also didn't expect that Xiao Hua could easily dodge most of his palm. "Senior brother." Xiao Mao finally came to his senses and knelt on the ground as he begged. "Humph. As expected of a prestigious sect, as expected of benevolence, righteousness, and morality, as expected of the importance of face." Xiao Hua said as expected 3 times in a row and turned around in anger. He didn't look back and hurriedly left. Fellow Taoist Xiao, catch? Only after Xiao Hua had walked far away did Zhuo Qingyuan let out a long laugh. He waved his hand, and a scarlet radiance flew in front of Xiao Hua. "If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come and vote for it. -5. Chapter 1330. A crimson light flew in front of Xiao Hua. Zhuo Qingyuan shouted from behind him, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, this is I's messaging talisman. I know exactly what fellow Taoist I did. If fellow Taoist needs anything from me, please send a message to I." Xiao Hua was furious. He helped them out of goodwill, yet half of his face was swept away. Hearing this, he unconsciously turned around and sneered, "Fellow Taoist Chua, take back your goodwill. I still have the other half of my face." However, when he turned around, Zhuo Qingyuan and Xiao Mao had already disappeared. Damn it! Is this great sect so stingy? Xiao Hua let out a long sigh. "I beat up your junior martial brother only as a temporary measure. Since you knew, why did you pretend to use the same method to return the favor? You clearly wanted to thank me, yet you said you had no other choice. What the hell is this?" Looking at the flashing messaging talisman, Xiao Hua reached for it and threw it into the space behind his head, thinking, "This Zhuo Qingyuan is more honest than that Mingcue mountain Shiwoming. He really gave me a messaging talisman. If I really have something to tell him, he probably won't refuse. Who knows? Besides, if I have something to deal with, why would I look for someone else for no reason? I'll make Xuanyan School owe me a favor for the rest of my life." Xiao Hua thought fiercely. Xiao Hua seemed to have been provoked by Xuanyan School's Zhuo Qingyuan. He walked around randomly, buying everything he saw without hesitation. Not long after, there were more ground escape talismans, Vajra talismans, and so on in the space. He even bought some ordinary medicinal pills. As he bought more and more things, the anger in his heart gradually dissipated, using spirit stones to exchange for a happy mood. Sure enough, this was an unbreakable truth. After his anger subsided, Xiao Hua no longer had the mood to wander around E.G. After buying the necessary materials to refine the yellow talismans, he turned around and went back. As he turned around, he saw a stall to the side. On it were some medicinal pills and yellow talismans for refining pills. Xiao Hua's eyes turned, and he walked up, cupping his hands and saying, "Fellow Taoist, please." The stall owner was a female cultivator around 40 years old. She had a kind look on her face, which was also the main reason why Xiao Hua came here. "Fellow Taoist, do you need the medicinal pills listed above?" The female cultivator asked with a smile. "That's right." Xiao Hua picked up a few cheap pills and bought them. After handing over the spirit stones, Xiao Hua coughed and smiled apologetically. "I have a difficult matter that I need to ask fellow Taoist for advice." "Really? Fellow Taoist, please speak." The female cultivator seemed to be very easy to talk to and replied, "I want to know, where can I exchange for a pill furnace for alchemy?" Although Xiao Hua's face was hidden in the fog, he still felt a little feverish. Pill furnace? The female cultivator was stunned. She stared vigilantly at Xiao Hua for a moment, then looked left and right. "Fellow Taoist, you're a rogue cultivator, right?" "Yes, I am." "Then I advise fellow Taoist to find a sect to rely on. Only within a sect can you find pill furnaces for alchemy. Where else can you exchange for pill furnaces?" The female cultivator smiled and said, "Don't think that EG has everything. It's impossible to find the cultivation methods, pill recipes, pill furnaces, and talisman crafting methods that rogue cultivators need." Could it be there's no room for exchange at all? Xiao Hua didn't give up and asked, "Hee, even if there's a pill furnace, think about it. People from cultivation sects, cultivation families, and Jinghua City, who wouldn't covet it? But you're just a small rogue cultivator. How can you snatch it from them? I'm not afraid of you laughing at me, but the wealth of my sect is far from what a rogue cultivator like you can compare to." The female cultivator dispelled Xiao Hua's wishful thinking without any trace of politeness. "All right, thank you for your guidance." Xiao Hua cupped his hands in thanks and turned to leave. "Hee, you really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth." After Xiao Hua walked far away, the female cultivator shook her head and muttered to herself, "Pill furnaces. How could they be so easy to obtain and use?" AI, as expected, it seems that this matter of pill refinement still depends on luck. How could Xiao Hua care about the opinions of others after he left? He had already asked fellow Taoist Liang of Mo's Spirit Herb Hall a few days ago, and fellow Taoist Liang's answer was the same as this female cultivator's. However, Xiao Hua's wicked heart didn't give up. He wanted to see if there was any possibility of obtaining a pill furnace at EG. In addition, he had made a certain amount of progress in refining yellow talismans, so he unconsciously placed greater hope in pill refinement. Unfortunately, reality was very cruel, and the path of pill refinement couldn't be taken for the time being. Xiao Hua sighed. He didn't care about any of the stalls left and right. He found a secluded place and took down the maze amulet, then strolled out of EG. Right after Xiao Hua left EG, a fourth-layer aura refining cultivator hurried over from not too far away. That cultivator had an anxious expression on his face and looked very flustered. However, as soon as he saw Xiao Hua, his face lit up with joy. He practically ran over to Xiao Hua, cupped his hands in greeting and said anxiously, "Are you fellow Taoist Xiao Hua?" Xiao Hua's head was lowered as he pondered over the pill furnace. At this time, he heard someone call out his name. He was extremely astonished. When he raised his head to look, he saw a square-faced cultivator with sparse eyebrows. He wasn't familiar with this cultivator, so he couldn't help but cup his hands and say, "I am Xiao Hua. I wonder, how did fellow Taoist know me? I am Zhang Zhihao." The cultivator cupped his fists and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, did you forget that when you followed fellow Taoist Qingfeng and fellow Taoist Qing to Huayan Park, it was I who brought fellow Taoist Xiao Fengyue and fellow Taoist Han Fei to Huayan Park?" When Xiao Hua heard this, he repeatedly nodded and said embarrassedly, "Oh, that's right. That person is fellow Taoist Zhang. My apologies, I was thinking about something and neglected fellow Taoist Zhang." Soon after, Xiao Hua glanced sideways at EG and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Zhang also came to EG? I'm afraid you're a bit late." No. Zhang Zhihao hurriedly waved his hands and said with a smile, "I came because fellow Taoist Ma Qingqing asked me to look for fellow Taoist Xiao." "Ah, Senior Ma?" Xiao Hua was overjoyed. Needless to say, there was definitely some progress in the matter of him joining the Heaven Forsaken. He immediately asked, "I wonder why Senior Ma is looking for I?" But then Xiao Hua asked curiously, "Doesn't Senior Ma have Eye Summoning Talisman? Why don't you use it?" Fellow Taoist Ma has already used the Summoning Talisman. However, the Summoning Talisman can't fly out. In this case, fellow Taoist Xiao has either left Jinghua City or is in a place where the Summoning Talisman can't fly to. Zhang Zhihao patiently explained, "But there are many places in Jinghua City that can block the Summoning Talisman. This EG is one of them." Fellow Taoist Ma guessed that fellow Taoist Xiao is most likely to come to EG, so he asked I to look for fellow Taoist Xiao. "Oh, so it's like that." Xiao Hua understood and nodded. "Then, why is Senior Ma looking for I?" I saw that fellow Taoist Ma and fellow Taoist Qing have a few talisman masters with them. I'm afraid it's about fellow Taoist Xiao joining the Heaven Forsaken? Fellow Taoist Ma didn't say, so I can't speak blindly." Zhang Zhihao said apologetically. "Is that so? That's great." Xiao Hua said with surprise, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, please wait a moment. I'll send a summoning talisman to ask later." "Haha, I'm afraid fellow Taoist Xiao will be disappointed." Zhang Zhihao looked at the sky and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Ma, fellow Taoist Qing, and many other fellow Taoists have probably already left the city. Today, the important members of the Heaven Forsaken will go outside. I made an appointment with fellow Taoist Ma. If I can't find fellow Taoist Xiao, fellow Taoist Ma and the others won't wait outside the city. The next time they come back will probably be a month later." "Ah? A month?" Xiao Hua was a little anxious and hurriedly said, "Then, I'll have to ask fellow Taoist Zhang to lead the way. Let's go quickly. Don't let Senior Ma and Senior Qing wait too long." Zhang Zhihao nodded and said, "I have the same intention." As he spoke, he led the way out of Jinghua City. Xiao Hua followed closely, but he was a little uneasy in his heart. These days, he had been refining fireball talismans and confinement talismans. However, he used his unique technique. Although he also practiced drawing fireball talismans with a talisman brush, but he didn't make much progress. Now that he had to pass Heaven Forsaken's test, he was a little regretful that he shouldn't have spent more time on fireball talismans. What should I do? Xiao Hua frowned and followed Zhang Zhihao with his head lowered. He was worried as he walked. Walking out of Jinghua City from EG, wasn't through the city gate that Xiaohua used to enter the city. After Zhang Zhihao took Xiaohua out of Jinghua City, he used a flight talisman to take Xiaohua in another direction. Xiaohua didn't dare to reveal his flying speed and slowly followed behind Zhang Zhihao. Zhang Zhihao also didn't panic. He flew with Xiaohua's speed for the time it took to eat a meal. Seeing that the sun was about to set, he landed. Xiaohua looked around. It was all dead wood and brambles. He didn't see anyone. He was a little surprised and asked, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, how come? I don't see Senior Qing and the others?" "Yeah, I'm also puzzled. This is the place we agreed on. It's not yet time. They shouldn't have left." Zhang Zhihao looked around and was also puzzled. He thought for a moment and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, please wait a moment. In a moment, I will send a message talisman to ask." As he spoke, Zhang Zhihao patted his storage bag and took out a scarlet-yellow talisman. "I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist Zhang." Xiaohua cupped his hands and smiled. Then he looked around. This was a desolate mountain valley. Brambles covered the ground. Most of the nearby trees were withered. The branches that slanted upwards slightly swayed in the twilight sky. Xiaohua felt it was a little strange. Senior Qing really knows how to pick a place. Apart from falling from the sky, no one would. Suddenly, Xiaohua's heart jumped. A thought suddenly popped into his mind. This kind of place is very dangerous. Isn't it a good place to kill and steal? When Xiaohua thought of this, a trace of cold sweat immediately appeared on his back. He hurriedly wanted to turn around. Unfortunately, he was still too late. Right next to Xiaohua, Zhang Zhihao's right hand was holding a scarlet message talisman. His left hand had already patted the scarlet message talisman the moment Xiaohua turned around. A confinement talisman flew out. Magic power flowed out, and the confinement talisman emitted a faint brilliance. It rushed towards Xiaohua, who was just about to turn around. -5. Chapter 1331. Xiaohua was startled, and just as he was about to turn around, the confinement talisman had already fallen. A thin brilliance emerged from Xiaohua's body, confining Xiaohua's 4 limbs. Xiaohua's 4 limbs exerted all their strength to twist, but he was unable to break free. What are you doing?" Xiaohua blurted out in shock. "Ha ha ha!" Seeing this, Zhang Zhihao clapped his hands and laughed. "What a good middle-grade confinement talisman. This effect is simply not inferior to a high-grade confinement talisman. I didn't expect fellow Taoist Xiao to have such a good method. If I wasn't in a hurry, I would really want to know where fellow Taoist got so many middle-grade confinement talismans." Soon after, Zhang Zhihao took a step forward and took away Xiaohua's storage pouch. He sneered. "I already confined you. What do you think I want to do? Isn't that really childish?" When he opened the storage pouch and saw a pile of yellow talismans and a pile of spirit stones, his eyes unconsciously lit up, and he laughed again. "You brat, you really know how to get rich. I don't know where you got these fireball talismans and confinement talismans, but you actually earned so many spirit stones. What a pity. You have spirit stones but don't have the life to spend them, so you benefited I for nothing." While speaking, Zhang Zhihao took out his own storage pouch to transfer the spirit stones and other items. Xiaohua had already recovered his calm at this time. His eyes coldly looked at Zhang Zhihao, but his arms slightly exerted force. He already had the experience of breaking through with force before, and he also broke free from this confinement talisman. However, the confinement talisman last time was obviously a low-grade one, far less powerful than today's confinement talisman. Sigh. This confinement talisman, listening to Zhang Zhihao's words, I refined it myself. I'm the one who's trapped myself in a cocoon. Xiaohua secretly complained, his arms still slowly increasing the force. Huh? The number of spirit stones is wrong? After Zhang Zhihao took all the spirit stones from Xiaohua's storage pouch, he was slightly dazed. He raised his head and said, "Didn't you sell more than 200 confinement talismans at the stall just now? How come there are only so few spirit stones? Also, I followed you for a few days and saw you harvest a lot of spirit stones every day. Where did you put them? Could it be that you put them in an inn? You're quite cautious." As he spoke, Zhang Zhihao searched his storage bag again. Not long after, he found a yellow talisman. He sneered and said, "The inn you're staying in is actually better than the one I'm staying in." Humph. Oh, right. Fellow Taoist Xiao, do you want to live? Do you want to live to die? Or do you want to be burned to ashes by my fire talisman? As he spoke, Zhang Zhihao took out a fireball talisman from Xiao Hua's storage pouch. Urging his magic power, a small fireball was born in his hand. You to let to die to Xiao to die? Aren't you afraid that I'll tell fellow Taoist Qing? To S, what is I to die to die? Zhang Zhihao said with a smile, Heaven forsaken doesn't stop fighting. Even if fellow Taoist Qing knows that I killed you, he has nothing to say. To this to die, to die, to, Taoist, Xiao, to Xiao. What if this poor Taoist wants to live? How could Xiao Hua believe Zhang Zhihao's words? He asked with contempt. You to say, to? Tell I how you got these fire talismans and confinement talismans. Maybe I can consider it. Zhang Zhihao said with a smile. I followed you for many days and only saw you between the inn and E.G. I didn't see you go anywhere else. The origin of these yellow talismans is so hard to understand. Could it be that you've been keeping them in your storage pouch for a long time? Humph. I'm afraid you won't be able to figure out the origin of these two talismans. Xiao Hua sneered. Ha. You want to threaten I with this? Zhang Zhihao looked at Xiao Hua with extreme contempt and threw the fireball over. It spun on top of Xiao Hua's head. If you are tactful, tell me the origin of this yellow talisman and give this poor Taoist a way to make money. This poor Taoist might be soft-hearted and let you go. If you want to use this to threaten this poor Taoist. These fire talismans and confinement talismans were made by I myself. Xiao Hua took a deep breath and channeled all the strength in his body to his arms. His tone was still calm as he said, Ha. Zhang Zhihao laughed out loud, as if he'd heard the funniest thing in the world. He bent over, one of his hands slightly raised, pointing at Xiao Hua. Out of breath, he said, You're only at the second layer of qi refining? You actually refined a high-grade fireball talisman? You think? You're Imo Sang Mountain's Imo Sang Elder. Seeing this, Xiao Hua knew he had a chance. Thus, he raised his arms and shouted, That's right. This sound almost deafened Zhang Zhihao's ears, and Xiao Hua's entire body strength was also exerted through his two arms along with this loud shout. Xiao Hua's upper body, along with the forceful lifting of his two arms, a burst of brilliance flashed. Rip. A crisp sound like tearing silk rang out. The upper body imprisonment talisman was actually torn apart by Xiao Hua's two arms, and along with the flickering brilliance of his upper body, the brilliance of Xiao Hua's entire body also flickered a few times before completely disappearing. The entire imprisonment talisman was broken apart by force. Zhang Zhihao bent over, as if he still hadn't recovered from his laughter. However, when he saw Xiao Hua actually break the confinement talisman in a short moment, the smile on his face froze. He only cried out a single word before immediately coming to his senses. Before he could straighten his body, he moved his finger and channeled his magic power. The fireball flying in the air flew towards Xiao Hua's head. The fireball broke free from Zhang Zhihao's control and suddenly enlarged, sucking in all the surrounding spiritual energy. Xiao Hua broke free from the confinement, and his heart was very calm. Seeing the fireball rapidly flying over, his complexion changed greatly. He had seen the power of his high-grade fireball talisman in the yellow talisman shop. If he was hit by this fireball, wouldn't he immediately turn into ashes? In a hurry, he didn't care about anything else. He used his hand to brush the side of his ear and took out an icicle talisman from his space. He channeled his magic power, and a blue brilliance also met the fireball. Within the brilliance was a long ice spike, condensed from spiritual energy. Sizzle. Like snow water being poured into a pot of oil, the ice spike pierced into the fireball. As the ice spike melted, it let out an ear-piercing sound. The sound became increasingly urgent, and the fireball also gradually shrunk. However, that icicle talisman was refined by someone else and couldn't compare to Xiao Hua's fireball talisman. When the ice spike on the icicle talisman was exhausted, the fireball was still not small. Boom! A loud sound rang out. The fireball fell on the ground and blew up a rather large hole in the ground. Zhang Zhihao was clearly shocked by the might of this fireball talisman and was somewhat dazed. Xiaohua was just the opposite. After he sent out the icicle talisman, he didn't pause in the slightest. He channeled his magic power and took advantage of the fact that the flight talisman still hadn't lost its effect to quickly fly in front of Zhang Zhihao. Zhang Zhihao threw out the fireball and had already straightened up. At this moment, his face was filled with astonishment. He had just woken up from the enormous might of the fireball talisman and didn't have time to think about how Xiaohua broke free from the confinement talisman. He also didn't have time to think about where Xiaohua took out the icicle talisman. He also didn't have time to think about why Xiaohua inexplicably rushed over. Xiaohua had already rushed to a distance of 3 feet in front of him. "You're courting death." Zhang Zhihao threw all of his astonishment to the side. He slapped his hand and took out another fireball talisman. He channeled his magic power and blocked in front of Xiaohua. Xiaohua was helpless. How could he still dare to touch this kind of fireball talisman that he refined himself? His figure hastily flashed to the side, wanting to dodge. But no matter how fast he flew, it couldn't compare to the channeling of magic power. Zhang Zhihao grinned nastily. That fireball followed like a shadow and flew in front of Xiaohua's face. Xiaohua thought for a moment. He brushed his hand and took out 2 yellow talismans from the space. One was the icicle talisman, which he stabbed towards the fireball talisman. The other was the weak water talisman. He channeled his magic power and stuck it on his head. A water-blue brilliance flashed and covered Xiaohua's entire body. Looking at Zhang Zhihao again, he wasn't the slightest bit slower than Xiaohua. After the fireball talisman was thrown out, he similarly slapped his storage pouch, and a yellow talisman also landed on his body. A yellow light flashed. It was an iron cloak talisman, wrapping Zhang Zhihao's entire body. "I would like to see just how many yellow talismans you have." Zhang Zhihao's body floated into the air. He sneered and waved his hand again. A yellow talisman shot out. That yellow talisman first burned like the fireball talisman. A dark red flame blocked in front of Xiaohua. Without waiting for Xiaohua to take out the icicle talisman, that flame exploded with a bang and sealed the space around Xiaohua's body. It was like a sea of fire had covered Xiaohua. "Humph, little thing. You actually wasted one of I's high-level fire net talismans." Zhang Zhihao looked at the sea of fire that lingered in front of him. There was a trace of reluctance in his eyes. He couldn't clearly see Xiaohua's figure in the light of the fire, but Zhang Zhihao absolutely believed that with Xiaohua's second-level refinement magic power, he absolutely wouldn't be able to dodge this fire net. "That's right. This guy keeps moving in front of me. What's he doing? Could it be that he wants to snatch away the storage bag in my hands?" Zhang Zhihao's eyes flashed with a fiery light. He was somewhat bewildered. Just when Zhang Zhihao was puzzled, he suddenly felt a trace of wind behind him. He immediately had a startled realization in his heart. Someone wants to be the Oriole. After a startled realization, Zhang Zhihao didn't dare to be negligent. He also didn't turn his head. He slapped his storage bag and at the same time threw out the fireball talisman. His figure also turned and dodged to the side. Right behind Zhang Zhihao, 2 fireballs collided together, letting out an incomparably loud rumbling sound. "Who?" Zhang Zhihao turned around as he flew. Before he could finish speaking, a cold voice rang out extremely close behind him. "Nonsense, besides I. Who else could it be? Xiaohua?" Zhang Zhihao heard and his eyes opened wide. "How did you run behind me?" What answered him wasn't Xiaohua's voice. Instead, it was an incomparably enormous force that smashed into the back of Zhang Zhihao's neck. Bang! A loud sound rang out. Zhang Zhihao felt a burst of dizziness and his vision blurred. His figure practically flipped in the air. At the same time, the brilliance of the iron cloak talisman on his body flickered. It looked like it was about to collapse. "Body cultivator!" Zhang Zhihao shouted loudly. His figure barely stabilized. He slapped his storage bag and shot out another iron cloak talisman. At the same time, his other hand wasn't slow either. He brought out another fire net talisman and threw it behind him. -5. Chapter 1332. Hee, fellow Daoist Zhang, can you hit I? Xiaohua's voice sounded behind Zhang Zhihao, But when Zhang Jihao's fire net found Xiao Hua's voice quickly turned to Zhang Jihao's other side. It was faster than Zhang Jihao expected. So fast, Zhang Jihao was shocked. His mind moved quickly, and his magic power spread out. That fire net flew towards Xiao Hua's voice. But just as the fire net was released, a black shadow flew at extreme speed from Zhang Jihao's side. It was as fast as an arrow. Zhang Jihao's heart jumped. He couldn't care about the fire net. He urged his flying talisman to dodge, but that huge force came again like a mountain. This time, Zhang Jihao saw it clearly. The origin of that force was actually Xiao Hua's fist. He finally understood why Xiao Hua wanted to fly in front of him from the beginning and not compete with yellow talismans like other cultivators. Pa! There was another muffled sound. Xiao Hua's fist hit Zhang Jihao's armpit without hesitation. Although the majority of the strength of the fist was blocked by the Iron Cloak talisman, a faint force was transmitted to Zhang Jihao's body. Zhang Jihao's qi and blood were tumbling, and the mana in his body was in chaos. In particular, the brilliance of the Iron Cloak talisman began to flicker, and it was about to collapse. What level of body cultivator is this guy? He actually hit it so deeply. Zhang Jihao only had time to be secretly shocked in his heart. Before he could say anything, his two hands were the same as before. One hand took out an Iron Cloak talisman, and the other hand shot out a Fireball talisman. Only this time, the Fireball talisman didn't go far. It swayed around his body, waiting for Xiao Hua to attack. Xiao Hua's flying speed was indeed fast, but it wasn't as fast as Zhang Jihao's vision. Just as he threw out his fist, he saw the fireball flying towards him. Xiao Hua didn't dare to resist and could only dodge. Zhang Jihao also learned to be shrewd. He flew up and pulled apart the distance between him and Xiao Hua. He tried his best to avoid letting Xiao Hua get close to him. At the same time, he wasn't in a hurry to use the Fireball talisman. He used it as a defensive measure, blocking between himself and Xiao Hua. Seeing this, Xiao Hua was helpless. This was exactly what he had told Xiao Yuehang before. Although his method of using force to break the spell was unexpected, if he didn't succeed in one strike and others found out, then he would completely lose the initiative. No one would foolishly stand there and wait for Xiao Hua to attack. Not to mention the twin blue bears from before, but this Zhang Jihao only had a cultivation of the fourth layer of the Qi refining realm. His flying speed wasn't as fast as Xiao Hua's. With just the Iron Cloak talisman and Fireball talisman, Xiao Hua was unable to take his life. The most hateful thing was that Zhang Jihao actually took the Fireball talisman refined by Xiao Hua. The might of that Fireball talisman was truly terrifying. Xiao Hua didn't feel it before, but once he encountered a fight, he immediately discovered the benefits of this high-grade Fireball talisman. And this kind of situation was precisely what Xiao Hua was most worried about. Admittedly, his life was no longer in danger, and he could use the flying talisman to escape at any time. But some of his secrets were exposed in front of Zhang Jihao. Not to mention whether or not Zhang Jihao suspected the origin of the two icicle talismans just now, the secret of using force to break the spell and flying speed absolutely couldn't be leaked. He absolutely believed that as long as Zhang Jihao escaped today, he would definitely gather some loose cultivators from Heaven Forsaken to find trouble with him. Not to mention his situation after joining Heaven Forsaken. Even if the twin blue bears and the others knew about this matter, they would definitely contact him. Heaven Forsaken didn't refrain from fighting and also respected talisman masters. But, under the covetous eyes of others, how could he peacefully cultivate? Since Zhang Jihao dared to make a move against this young master absolutely has no reason to spare his life. Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes, his figure floating in the air, coldly looking at Zhang Jihao. At this time, Zhang Jihao felt that he had a countermeasure and gradually calmed down, but the expression on his face was uncertain, unknown as to what he was thinking. But this Iron Cloak talisman, this young master's fist can't break it. I'm afraid it will have to be the same as before, hitting the same point multiple times. Xiao Hua thought, slapping his hand. Another flying talisman hit his body. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Seeing this, Zhang Jihao hurriedly called out, "Everything is a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding? Xiao Hua sneered. His figure spread out, flying towards Zhang Zhihao at extreme speed. Zhang Zhihao hurriedly urged his magic power, controlling the fireball to block in front of Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua changed his direction, swayed a few times, and spent another 2 icicle talismans to get close to Zhang Zhihao's side. This time, Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his fist, hitting Zhang Zhihao's back twice in a row, almost breaking the Iron Cloak talisman again. Unfortunately, at this time, Zhang Zhihao's Iron Cloak talisman and Fireball talisman flew out again, blocking Xiao Hua's fist. Alas, what a pity! If only I had a confinement talisman. Xiao Hua was somewhat regretful. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have sold the confinement talisman. But then he smiled bitterly. Confinement talismans are useful, but Zhang Zhihao isn't just standing there. It's very difficult to hit him. If the confinement talisman can imprison Zhang Zhihao, what's the use of force to break through? Wouldn't a fireball talisman be enough? If only I had a little more strength. Xiao Hua secretly sighed. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua was slightly surprised, seeming to have thought of something. However, at this time, Zhang Zhihao opposite Xiao Hua was already aware that something was wrong. Under Xiao Hua's fast flight, he could only parry without the power to fight back. At this time, he still had a lot of Iron Cloak talismans and even more Fireball talismans, but if he purely defended, his Iron Cloak talismans would run out sooner or later. Without this Iron Cloak talisman, he didn't doubt that as long as Xiao Hua's unparalleled strength touched his body, he would only have one outcome: to be beaten into a pile of meat paste. As for the Fireball talisman, although its power is great, it's also very easy to dodge, unless it's sprinkled in large quantities. But if it's sprinkled in large quantities, with Zhang Zhihao's cultivation base, he wouldn't be able to control it very well. In addition to Xiao Hua's fast flight, Zhang Zhihao didn't have the confidence to hit Xiao Hua. Very naturally, Zhang Zhihao's heart beat a retreat. Zhang Zhihao's heart retreated. He also shot out a flying talisman. His figure rapidly retreated, flying in the direction of Jinghua City. "Where do you think you're going?" Xiao Hua was very anxious, he shouted. His figure didn't hesitate. In a few breaths' time, he chased after him, blocking Zhang Zhihao's path. Zhang Zhihao didn't answer. He clapped his hands. A yellow talisman shot out and sneered. "Although fellow Taoist Xiao has the means, if I want to leave, can you stop me?" That yellow talisman was a fireball again. Xiao Hua was helpless. He still dodged, and Zhang Zhihao also slightly dodged, fleeing into the distance again. Xiao Hua shot down the fireball and chased after him again. The two were entangled for a moment. Xiao Hua once again found an opportunity to hit Zhang Zhihao. Just like before, he used the Iron Cloak talisman again. He still saved his life. Therefore, the two people, one chased and one fled, flew for a while. Xiao Hua still didn't have a way to kill the enemy. He couldn't help but feel anxious. Zhang Zhihao, on the other hand, became more and more relaxed. When he saw Xiao Hua's fist strike again, he sneered and shot out a yellow talisman. "Brat, you're going too far. If I don't show my power, you think I'm a sick cat?" That yellow talisman flew in the air. It immediately turned into a long sword, directly piercing Xiao Hua's fist. Seeing the flying sword talisman, the long sword formed by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth flashed across Xiao Hua's mind like lightning. Immediately, Xiao Hua woke up, grasping what he was thinking just now. Seeing the sharp sword piercing towards him, Xiao Hua hurriedly dodged, but this flying sword wasn't as sharp as the fireball. The sword tip was sharp, and its speed was incomparable. Zhang Zhihao suddenly threw it out, with the intention of catching Xiao Hua off guard. Xiao Hua could only barely dodge the fist. That flying sword slanted and pierced Xiao Hua's shoulder. The weak water talisman's brilliance flashed under the flying sword. It only lasted for a moment before it was pierced. Xiao Hua's figure hurriedly moved, dodging to the side, the flying sword following behind him like a shadow. "Ha ha ha!" Seeing this, Zhang Zhihao's figure laughed loudly in the air. Taking advantage of Xiao Hua's weak water talisman again, his fire net talisman also blocked in front of Xiao Hua. At the same time, several fireball talismans were also thrown out by Zhang Zhihao with heartache, and Zhang Zhihao himself immediately flew into the distance, as if he didn't want to see the results of the fire net talisman and fireball talisman. Bang, bang, bang. A burst of sounds rang out, all of them exploding under the fire net. Xiao Hua was in a sea of fire. Just at this moment, a gust of wind blew. Just as Zhang Zhihao had flown a distance of about 1 zhong, Xiao Hua's figure actually flew out from the sea of fire under his feet. Xiao Hua's entire body was covered in flames. His face had some charred marks, and behind him was a flying sword. You. Seeing Xiao Hua actually directly fly out from the sea of fire and attack with his fist at close range, Zhang Zhihao was suddenly startled. But in his heart, he didn't take it seriously. Both of his hands moved, patting his storage bag, taking out an iron cloak talisman and a fireball talisman each. Only, in Zhang Zhihao's eyes, the fist that Xiao Hua struck towards his lower abdomen seemed to be different from before. Faintly, it seemed to be holding a pitch-black thing. What is this? Zhang Zhihao only had time to turn this thought before the thing in Xiao Hua's hand pierced his lower abdomen. Bang! A force much stronger than before struck Zhang Zhihao. The iron cloak talisman on Zhang Zhihao's body flashed brilliantly and was pierced by the sharp object in Xiao Hua's hand almost without any resistance. A violent stinging pain came from Zhang Zhihao's abdomen. Zhang Zhihao's face was filled with disbelief, his eyeballs almost popping out. The iron cloak talisman in his right hand was still in midair, and the fireball talisman in his left hand had already turned into a fireball, but he forgot to hit the fleeing Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua's attack succeeded. Seeing Zhang Zhihao take out the fireball talisman, he immediately let go of the spear in his hand and flew back to the distance. His face was pale as he looked at Zhang Zhihao. His eyes didn't even blink, appearing extremely nervous. He actually didn't even bother to extinguish the flames burning around his body. Zhang Zhihao's figure stopped in midair, and he lowered his head to look at his abdomen. The devil spear head was deeply pierced, and trickles of blood flowed out continuously like a stream, gradually submerging the devil spear head. Zhang Zhihao clenched his teeth and threw away the fireball. He patted his storage bag with his hand, wanting to take out the pills. The sharp spear head in the blood flashed with a strange black light. That black light followed the blood flowing out and flew into Zhang Zhihao's heart meridian. With just a light twirl, the true blood in the heart meridian was sucked into the spear head. -5. Chapter 1333. As for Zhang Zhihao, his vision went black, and he directly fell from the sky into the dust. He didn't have the slightest aura. Seeing Zhang Zhihao fall from the sky, Xiao Hua didn't dare to go forward. He didn't know what was going on with Zhang Zhihao. After all, he wanted to use the devil spear tip and his own strength to break Zhang Zhihao's confinement talisman. But he didn't expect the devil spear tip to directly pierce through the confinement talisman and pierce into Zhang Zhihao's abdomen. The confinement talisman on Zhang Zhihao's body hadn't completely collapsed yet, and he was afraid of Zhang Zhihao's fireball talisman, so he could only run away. As for the devil spear tip's power, he didn't know. His intuition told him that the spear tip that pierced into Zhang Zhihao's abdomen could only injure him. It couldn't take his life. So when he saw Zhang Zhihao fall into the dust, he only thought it was Zhang Zhihao's strategy to lure the enemy. Ouch! Just when Xiao Hua was hesitating, pain came from his body. The flames of the fire net talisman and fireball talisman had already broken the weak water talisman on his body and directly burned his body. Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. He brushed the back of his head and shot out 2 more weak water talismans. Only then did all the flames extinguish. But in this moment, his Taoist robe was already burned to tatters. Alas, this fire net talisman is indeed a high-grade yellow talisman. Amazing! Xiao Hua stopped far away in the air and sighed with emotion. Also, my fireball talisman can actually be thrown out in large quantities. Why didn't I think of that? It made me dodge for a while. If I really ran into one, I wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Xiao Hua sighed with emotion, but his eyes stared at Zhang Zhihao's body on the ground, thinking about how to deal with it. In a moment, Xiao Hua's brows relaxed and he thought, I'm too nervous. Whether this guy is faking it or not, won't I know with a fireball talisman? Thinking of this, he flicked his hand, and a fireball talisman appeared. He urged his magic power, and it turned into a fireball that flew toward Zhang Jihao's body. Xiao Hua had made a lot of preparations and backups, but the fireball directly hit Zhang Jihao's body, which was still beyond his expectations. Seeing Zhang Jihao's body being burned to ashes by the fireball, Xiao Hua truly believed that a fourth-level qi refining cultivator had been killed by him. At this time, Xiao Hua didn't dare delay. He directly flew to the ground and picked up the devil spear tip. Looking at it, there wasn't any change. He waved his hand and put it into the space behind his head. Then he tied his storage pouch that on his waist. As Zhang's pouch, Xiao Hua's storage pouch for I, Xiao I, S for I for it. Its halves have its a hundreds. I, SSS, what's I? S halves for it. I have. It. Have. S dight. S of it. S's. I it. It. Thinking this, Xiao Hua didn't have time to look carefully at the contents of the storage pouch. He moved everything into the space behind his head. Then he casually tossed the storage pouch aside. Using his transcendence energy, he activated a flight talisman and flew towards Jinghua City at top speed. Zhang Jihao was originally fleeing towards Jinghua City, so Xiao Hua was also going in the same direction. In the time it took to eat a meal, he saw the city's shadow. The city's innumerable lights were reflected in the countless lakes, making them appear like specks of starlight. They were like the stars in the sky. The starlight in this lake seems a bit mysterious. Xiao Hua couldn't help but frown. However, he didn't have time to carefully examine it. He lowered his altitude and at the same time slowed down. Everything about his flight matched that of a second-level qi refining cultivator. At the same time, he took out his concealment cloak and put it on. At this time, many people were coming out of Jinghua City. Very few people were going in. When they saw Xiao Hua, they couldn't help but give him a second glance. Fortunately, Xiao Hua was wearing a concealment cloak. His face couldn't be seen, so he wasn't afraid of leaking anything to 100 Herb's Gate. When he arrived at the entrance of Jinghua City, Xiao Hua was just about to step into the light curtain when a low, hoarse voice shouted, "Fellow Taoist, stop!" Immediately after, a distorted figure appeared in the light curtain, blocking Xiao Hua's path. Xiao Hua was stunned. Not good. Could it be that the city gates are already closed? Sure enough, the Jinghua City disciple said, "Jinghua City closes its gates. No outsiders are allowed to enter. Fellow Taoist, please turn back." This, Xiao Hua turned his head and looked at the many cultivators coming out of Jinghua City. Each of them was at the 4th level of qi refining or higher. They all seemed to be as honeyed as Zhang Jihao. Xiao Hua couldn't help but feel anxious. "Senior, this junior's cultivation is too low. I'm afraid there will be some trouble tonight. Senior, please give me a way out. This is the iron law of Jinghua City. How could I dare to ignore it? If fellow Taoist doesn't have a proof of Jinghua City, then hurry up and go. While there are still many cultivators, find a few familiar and reliable ones." Proof of Jinghua City? Xiao Hua was delighted. He patted his storage pouch and took out the inn's yellow talisman. He handed it over and said, Is this a yellow talisman?" A divine sense came from the light curtain and swept over Xiao Hua's yellow talisman. The Foundation Establishment disciple said, "This is the proof of Jinghua City. Why didn't fellow Taoists take it out earlier?" Reporting to Senior, this junior really didn't know. "Please forgive me." Xiao Hua's face lit up with joy. Seeing the Jinghua City disciple's figure disappear, Xiao Hua hurriedly rushed into the light curtain, leaving behind a thin figure on the light curtain. When Xiao Hua's figure landed on the main street of Jinghua City, Xiao Hua's restless heart finally calmed down. He had a feeling of surviving a calamity. Immediately, Xiao Hua clasped his hands behind his back and walked unhurriedly along the main street towards the inn. As he walked, he thought about the process of killing Zhang Jihao just now. After all, this was the first opponent Xiao Hua killed on the Xiaoyu continent. It was also the first time he had confidence in himself. This Zhang Jihao is a 4th-level qi refinement expert. Whether it is his control of magic power, the use of yellow talismans, or his fighting experience, they are all far beyond this young master's reach. Being able to kill this bastard today is really a fluke. If it wasn't for that spear-tipped devil weapon, this young master absolutely wouldn't have been able to kill him. Alas, it really is as this young master expected. Although this young master's flight is swift, it still can't avoid the yellow talisman's speed. This young master's strength is invincible, but it still can't destroy the yellow talisman with one punch. If this young master's strength was a little stronger, then using force to break the spell wouldn't be empty words. But now, I still have to rely on this spear tip. Speaking of which, I'm afraid this spear tip is also strange. Even if an ordinary spear tip pierced into Zhang Jihao's abdomen, it would only cause some skin damage. A Wu Cheng pill should be able to heal it completely, not to mention taking his life. That's simply a fool's dream. Only, what's so strange about this spear tip? Could it be because it's a devil weapon? But if all devil weapons have this kind of magical use, why is it that Shi Wuming's devil weapon? No cultivator bought it? Although a piece of top-grade spirit stone is very expensive, who would complain about this killing weapon being expensive? This young master is really muddle-headed. Xiao Hua suddenly slapped his forehead. Although devil weapons have this kind of life-threatening use, but if it can't pierce into a cultivator's flesh, then isn't it the same as not having any use? Normally, cultivators would have defensive yellow talismans all over their bodies. Even some Taoist robes had defensive properties that could block demonic artifacts. I'm afraid only this young master's arms have great strength, plus the weight of this spear tip itself, as well as the sharpness of the spear tip, can easily pierce through the defensive yellow talisman's brilliance. The more Xiao Hua thought about it, the more he felt that it was reasonable. The more he thought about it, the more excited he felt. If that was really the case, then this would be Xiao Hua's one and only secret technique, the one and only way to break the spell using force. It would also be Xiao Hua's ultimate move to save his life. Only, this kind of technique still requires one to get close to the enemy. Xiao Hua immediately frowned. The cultivators of the country of Shi, who would let the enemy get close to them? I'm afraid that when they just started to attack, the yellow talismans would be like a storm raining down on them, right? That's right. Speaking of raining down on them, I actually forgot about the fireball talismans. I thought that I could only use them one by one. I didn't expect that I could actually use them all at once. The might of a single fireball talisman is already so great, so a whole bunch of fireball talismans would be even more powerful. I didn't know that I actually sold so many fireball talismans. No wonder those cultivators were so affectionate when they saw me. They didn't bargain at all when they put away the fireball talismans. It turns out that there was a hidden meaning behind it. The next time I see someone who is impatient, I'll directly throw a bunch of fireball talismans at them. Wouldn't the whole world be peaceful then? And it's not very good. If the enemy's speed is extremely fast, it can't be done. Didn't that guy Zhang Jihao think that I was flying too fast, so he couldn't hit me with the fireball talismans? And, from this, increasing my flying speed is also my life-saving technique. Only by increasing my flying speed and catching the enemy off guard can I use this trump card. But how can I increase my flying speed? Xiao Hua thought again. Escape of light. If I have the speed of light, who can be this young master's opponent? The speed of light. How fast is that? What kind of realm is that? Thinking too much, Xiao Hua unconsciously became infatuated. He raised his head and looked at the sparkling starlight. It seemed that within the starlight, there was a Xiao Hua who was using escape of light. After returning to the inn, Xiao Hua's excitement from killing a high-level cultivator had already calmed down. He no longer had the excitement he had before entering Jinghua City. After this excitement, he reflected. After this first life and death battle, Xiao Hua deeply felt that the cultivation world of this Dawn Rain continent was really abnormally cruel. There was no reasoning at all. Everything depended on one's own strength and methods. He had only met this rogue cultivator named Zhang Jihao once. He didn't know how he was targeted. He was very careful, but some of his whereabouts were still discovered. It seemed that he still had to be more cautious in the future. Moreover, even if he succeeded in killing Zhang Jihao, he didn't use absolute strength after all. He only relied on some unexpected methods. These methods might be useful for a short period of time, but if he failed and others found out, he would definitely die without a burial ground. -5. Chapter 1334. Perhaps, only by raising my cultivation and killing Zhang Jihao openly with my 5th level qi refining cultivation can I be considered a true success. Xiao Hua bit his lips, his eyes almost narrowed. For a moment, there was an unparalleled thirst for strength in his heart. One can't travel 1,000 miles without taking a few steps. My cultivation growth is slow, but it's still growth. As long as I work hard, there will be a day when I succeed. The only thing I can do now is to focus on cultivation and raise my magic power. Xiao Hua made up his mind and sat cross-legged. For several days, if he wasn't meditating and comprehending the heavens, he was cultivating the Songhua Dark Heart technique, and he was refining fireball talismans and confinement talismans. Along with the gradual increase of his magic power and the gradual increase of his experience in refining yellow talismans, Xiao Hua's drawing of fireball talismans with a talisman brush actually made a breakthrough. He could already draw fireball talismans with great difficulty. Looking at the freshly made fireball talismans, Xiao Hua felt awkward in his heart. Not to mention anything else, just looking at the uneven lines on the yellow talisman and the slightly twisted runes, they all clearly indicated that this fireball talisman was nothing more than a ruffian for practice. But it just so happened that the power of this fireball talisman was not at the elementary level. With Xiao Hua's experience in refining high-grade fireball talismans, he could easily determine that this seemingly crooked fireball talisman was most likely a mid-grade one. Xiao Hua pondered, but to no avail. He could only attribute this peculiar phenomenon to his own fire attribute constitution. On this day, Xiao Hua refined a fireball talisman. His heart stirred, and he thought to himself, after cultivating for several days, today should be the day of Jinghua City's change of market. Many sects in the country of Shi will come to Jinghua City to exchange what they have. Rare spiritual herbs, rare materials, they will all appear. Maybe I can even come across some cultivation methods? And, not to mention cultivation methods, even some pill formulas or talisman refining methods might be possible. If I don't go take a look, wouldn't it be a pity? Xiao Hua already knew how to refine fireball talismans. Entering Heaven's Forsaken was already a foregone conclusion. Xiao Hua's consciousness entered his space and sorted out the yellow talismans he refined in the past few days. After the matter with Zhang Jihao last time, Xiao Hua put everything inside his space. He only put some simple things in his storage pouch that matched his second layer aura refining cultivation. I forgot that the last time I killed Zhang Jihao, I also took some things from his storage bag. I wonder what they are. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua began to tidy up Zhang Jihao's things. On that day, Xiao Hua moved all the things in Zhang Jihao's storage bag into his own space, but most of these things were Xiao Hua's own, so he was too lazy to look carefully. He only scolded the poor bastard in his heart and cited Zhang Jihao's difficulties as a robber. Zhang Jihao indeed didn't have many things. He only had a few dozen mid-grade spirit stones, some yellow talismans, some booklets, a few robes, and some other personal belongings. I forgot. This guy is a 4th level qi refining cultivator. Maybe he has a cultivation method. Xiao Hua suddenly remembered. He seemed to have a bit of an afterthought. It was obvious that he didn't have any experience in robbing. Icicle talisman? Xiao Hua took out the first book and looked at it carefully. He couldn't help but be somewhat disappointed. This guy doesn't know how to refine talismans at all. Where did he get the icicle talisman? He must have stolen it from somewhere. If it was before, Xiao Hua would definitely be very happy to get the icicle talisman. But now that he was looking forward to a cultivation method, although he was happy, he was also very disappointed. Following that, the next few books were either travel notes or incomplete pieces of silk. In the end, there was even a secret manual for dual cultivation. Xiao Hua didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw it, but he was even more disappointed. Sure enough, he's a poor bastard. Not only do he have no spirit stones, he didn't even leave a cultivation method in his storage bag. Really, I don't know what to say about you. Can't you have a bit of the awareness of a rogue cultivator? Why did you carry everything with you? Xiao Hua cursed in his heart and threw the things back into the space. Xiao Hua was a bit uninterested in Zhang Jihao's Taoist robe. He only wanted to take a look, but when he saw one of the rooms, his eyes widened. This is a maze? Are you a real fan? In Xiao Hua's hands, among the robes he took out from the space, there was one that was exactly the same as the one he saw. It was actually a genuine item from Qiqiao sect. Xiao Hua's mood suddenly became excited. He couldn't help but nag. Like I said, this guy must have robbed a lot. How could he not have anything good? Presumably, all his spirit stones and spiritual herbs were converted into top-grade spirit stones to exchange for this maze. Humph, humph, there's no need to think about it. This guy was wearing this maze and following behind me, making me unable to detect him. This is great. Even death can't wipe out his crimes. He even tried to steal a chicken but ended up losing the rice used to lure it. He's benefiting me for nothing. What's the old saying again? If you always walk by the river, how can your shoes not get wet? Xiao Hua hummed an unknown tune as he put the maze into the space, thinking of using it himself in the future. Looking at the other robes, they were all ordinary. Xiao Hua didn't have the habit of wearing other people's robes. He threw out the fireball talisman he just refined and set the robes on fire. Although the fireball talisman Xiao Hua drew with a talisman pin looked terrible, its power was not bad. Although Xiao Hua had already controlled his magic power and there wasn't much spiritual energy in the room, it still made a sound, causing Xiao Hua to be surprised. The innkeeper won't come looking for trouble, right? Xiao Hua thought as he waved his sleeve, scattering the ashes of the robes on the ground. What is this? Xiao Hua's sharp eyes saw something that looked like a piece of gold leaf in the ashes. The gold foil was as thin as a book page. Xiao Hua exerted a bit of force, and the gold foil could also be folded. However, when he loosened his hand, the gold foil would bounce open. Xiao Hua used his finger to lightly flick it, and the gold foil would vibrate slightly. However, when Xiao Hua looked at it again and again, the gold leaf was still gold leaf. He couldn't see anything special about it. Since the gold leaf was found in the ashes of the Taoist robe, Zhang Zhihao must have hidden it in the Taoist robe. Since he took it so seriously and didn't leave it in the storage bag, it must be something extremely important. But what is it? Or, this robe was also robbed and Zhang Zhihao didn't know about it? Xiao Hua looked at the gold leaf in his hand thoughtfully. At this moment, the room's restriction shone slightly. Xiao Hua was surprised. This was the first time this kind of situation had happened. He didn't know how to deal with it. After a moment, the room started to tremble. Xiao Hua came to his senses and quickly stuck the yellow talisman on the door. He put the gold leaf in his hand into the space and prepared to escape. Fellow Taoist. However, when Xiao Hua removed the restriction in the room, a gentle voice came from outside. Xiao Hua was surprised. He looked over and saw a Foundation establishment cultivator looking at him with wrinkled brows. Senior. Xiao Hua didn't feel at ease and quickly jumped out of the room. He looked back with lingering fear and cupped his hands. Senior, do you have any instructions? Hee. I am the shopkeeper of this Fish Sun Inn. The cultivator smiled and returned the greeting. Ah, shopkeeper? Why is your inn's room suddenly shaking? Is it going to collapse? Xiao Hua quickly asked. As he spoke, he quickly walked away from the room. Fellow Taoist, don't panic. This isn't a problem with the inn's room. It's I who called fellow Taoist. The shopkeeper looked at Xiao Hua's cultivation and said with a smile, Shopkeeper, why are you looking for I? Xiao Hua immediately became vigilant. Nothing. Just now, fellow Taoist's room let out a huge rumble. I was afraid that fellow Taoist had an accident, so I came over to take a look. I already called you the first time, but fellow Taoist didn't respond, so I called you a second time. Xiao Hua's eyes swiveled. How could he still not understand what the shopkeeper was referring to? He hurriedly blushed and bowed, saying, Junior accidentally drew a fireball talisman. I've truly nagged the shopkeeper. So it's like that. The shopkeeper looked inside the room. Sure enough, the fire attribute's spiritual energy was abundant. He said with a smile, originally, fellow Taoist wasn't allowed to experiment with yellow talismans in the inn. However, fellow Taoist should also pay some attention. Fortunately, today is the day of the exchange. Apart from fellow Taoist, there's no one else in the inn. Otherwise, fellow Taoist would have greatly offended others. They've already gone to East City? Xiao Hua was stunned. He quickly cupped his hands and said, Shopkeeper, excuse me. Junior also has to hurry to E-City. I was careless and almost missed the time. The shopkeeper said with a smile, no hurry. Right now, it's just noon. There's still many hours before the evening market closes. Fellow Taoist can stroll around as much as you want. Oh, right. Fellow Taoist's room is due today. Do you want to continue renting it? Hearing the shopkeeper say that he was going to E-City to stroll around, Xiao Hua was unhappy. He waved his hand and said, many thanks for Senior's reminder. Junior will return to the mountain after strolling around E-City. I won't come to Jinghua City again. All right, fellow Taoist, please. I hope that fellow Taoist will stay at Yuyang and the next time you come to Jinghua City. The shopkeeper smiled and raised his hand to salute. Xiaohua saluted and left without looking back. Not long after leaving the inn, Xiaohua first looked for a secluded place and draped Zhang Jihao's genuine camouflage cloak over his body, concealing his cultivation and even concealing Xiaohua's height that was different from others. Xiaohua finally understood that as long as there was a possibility of him being seen, he had to wear this camouflage robe. He couldn't repeat the mistake of being targeted by Zhang Jihao. In Easy City, not only would the 100 Herbs Gate come, there would also be a lot of small fries who wanted to take advantage of him. Xiaohua had to be 100 times more careful. E-City was in the same place as E.G. Xiaohua arrived at E-City with ease. Today was clearly different from usual. Not to mention that he could hear the clamor of E-City from far away. Just by seeing the slightly multicolored brilliance in the sky above E-City, Xiaohua knew that Jinghua City's disciples were patrolling here again. Sure enough, when Xiaohua arrived at the entrance of E-City, a Jinghua City disciple around the 10th layer of Qi refining stopped him. This didn't exist in the previous E.G. Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, fellow Taoist, why don't you let I enter? That disciple looked at Xiaohua's camouflage robe and clearly didn't know Xiaohua's cultivation. He smiled and said, fellow Taoist, this is your first time coming to E-City, right? -5. Chapter 1335. I'm not allowed to enter on my first try? Xiaohua sneered when he saw the politeness of the Jinghua City's disciple. Not at all, not at all. Fellow Taoist, I welcome you on behalf of Jinghua City's City Lord Zhao. The disciple smiled apologetically. However, according to the rules of Jinghua City, everyone who enters E-City has to pay a mid-grade spirit stone as a fee for the services provided by Jinghua City. A mid-grade spirit stone? Xiaohua inwardly cursed. This was the price of a high-grade fireball talisman. Who knows how many cultivators there were in the trading market today? Who knows how much Jinghua City's income would be on the day of the trading market? They truly knew how to make money. Then, I can set up a stall to sell it? Xiaohua's heart stirred and he asked, that's right. E-City is different from E-City. Everyone has to pay a management fee. Anyone can sell it themselves? The disciple said politely, that's great. Xiaohua patted his storage pouch, and a piece of middle-grade spirit stone was casually handed over. He really had a rich and overbearing appearance. Fellow Taoist, please. After receiving the spirit stone, the Jinghua City's disciple handed over a scarlet communication talisman and said, this is the communication talisman of Jinghua City. If fellow Taoist needs Jinghua City's help in E-City, please send the communication talisman. This communication talisman can be used multiple times. After saying that, the disciple disappeared. Another mid-grade spirit stone is gone. Xiaohua sighed. This fireball talisman, I have to keep it for myself in the future. I can't sell it outside anymore. If someone takes it and attacks me, won't I be looking for trouble? But if that's the case, then won't I be unable to sell the confinement talisman? I can only sell spiritual herbs. Spiritual herbs are harmless, but I have to use them myself. Hee. If I have such a big place one day, I won't have to do anything but collect a mid-grade spirit stone from each person. Wouldn't I have made a fortune long ago? However, it's worth it to exchange a mid-grade spirit stone for Jinghua City's protection. Xiaohua smiled and kept the communication talisman in his storage pouch. Xiaohua was lost in his thoughts as he walked into E-City. The layout of E-City was similar to E.G., but there were more people of all walks of life. Whether it was the sellers or the people wandering around, there were several times more people than before. However, even with so many people walking together, it didn't seem crowded. Clearly, Jinghua City had used some kind of spatial magic here. Yes, the more the merrier. Who will notice me? Xiaohua was very satisfied. He slowly walked, looking for what he needed. From time to time, he would come across some commonly used items, such as Earth Escape Talisman, Earth Thorn Talisman, Diamond Talisman, Iron Cloak Talisman, and other yellow talismans. Xiaohua also bought a lot of them. A high-level sword talisman actually cost 3 mid-grade spirit stones. Xiaohua had a lot of spirit stones in his pouch, but he only bought 10 talismans. As for the Ice Thorn Talisman, Xiaohua had already obtained a refining method for the Ice Thorn Talisman. How could he go and buy another one? Along the way, there were more things than e.g., but when it came to the uniqueness, it was still lacking. What cultivation method, what talisman refining method, what pill formula, none of it was available. Just as Xiaohua was thinking about whether he should set up a stall to sell his yellow talismans, he heard a commotion not far away. There was an urgent shout. High-level Fire Snake Talisman. High-level Fire Snake Talisman. Someone is selling the refining method for the Fire Snake Talisman. When Xiaohua heard this, his spirit was greatly roused. A low-level Fireball Talisman was already so powerful when he refined it. If a high-level Fire Snake Talisman was refined by him, what kind of power would it have? Soon after, everyone arrived at a small stall. The stall owner was an old man close to 60 years old with a cultivation base around the 11th layer of the aura refining realm. At this moment, there were already 3 cultivators standing in front of his stall. All of them were in the foundation building realm. One was close to 40 years old with a big face, a tall stature, and a loud and clear voice. One was around 50 years old with a short stature and a scoundrel head and mouse eyes. The last one had an ordinary stature and a white face without a beard. They were also around 40 years old. When Xiaohua walked closer, the cultivator with a white face and no beard had a displeased expression on his face. He said coldly, "Fellow Taoists, I saw the refining method for the Fire Snake Talisman first. I'm currently discussing the price with this fellow Taoist. If you two want it, perhaps wait until I can't complete the transaction before coming forward." Hee, fellow Taoist, are you fellow Taoist Ming from Dear Luo Mountain? The scoundrel head and mouse eyes cultivator asked in a shrill voice. It's really I, Meng Tian. Does fellow Taoist know I? Meng Tian's expression turned cold as he coldly looked at the cultivator. Fellow Taoist, you're overthinking. I'm Zhan Yu from Yellow Flower School. Greetings, fellow Taoist Ming. Zhan Yu said as he cupped his hands in greeting. Zhan Yu? When Xiaohua heard this name and looked at the scoundrel head and mouse eyes cultivator's appearance, he almost burst out laughing. However, Meng Tian was different. As soon as he heard Zhan Yu's name, his expression turned solemn. He bowed and saluted. Greetings, fellow Taoist Zhan. Hee, what about this fellow Taoist? Can you bestow a name? Zhan Yu nodded and asked the other person. That person hesitated for a moment, then cupped his hands and said, I'm Yin Luiying from Lumen Sect. Yin Luiying's voice was loud and clear. Everyone in the surroundings heard it. All right, fellow Taoist Yin is too polite. Zhan Yu and Meng Tian both saluted. Xiaohua, who was at the side, was bewildered. Just now, the 3 of them were practically at daggers drawn. Why did they suddenly extinguish their anger and change to small talk? Just as Xiaohua was puzzled, Zhan Yu said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Ming, since everyone has introduced themselves, the following matters will be much easier. I won't hide it from fellow Taoist. Before fellow Taoist made the inquiry, I also discussed with this fellow Taoist. When the old man heard this, he hurriedly said, Yes, this senior asked before. It's just that this fellow Taoist wanted either 300 high-grade spirit stones or 3 foundation establishment pills. It really made I scratch my head, so I retreated to the side to think. Zhan Yu looked at the old man and said slowly. When Meng Tian heard this, he frowned slightly and said with a smile, Since fellow Taoist Zhan has already retreated, then it's naturally I's turn? But I also said I didn't want it. Zhan Yu sneered. Ha, that's right. Fellow Taoist Zhan also didn't say he didn't want it. Fellow Taoist Ming's inquiry is really inappropriate, Yen Luiying said with a smile. Fellow Taoist Yen, even if I disturbed fellow Taoist John, what does it have to do with fellow Taoist? Meng Tian unhappily replied, That's right. Since fellow Taoist Ming disturbed fellow Taoist John, then what's the point of I disturbing fellow Taoist Ming and making an inquiry? After all, didn't fellow Taoist Ming also not take out 300 high-grade spirit stones? Yin Luiying retorted. This? Meng Tian was speechless. It wasn't that he didn't want the refining method of the fire snake talisman, but this? The old man's price was really too high, exceeding his expectations. 3 foundation establishment pills, that could possibly create 3 foundation establishment experts. Seeing that the old man's cultivation was only around the 11th level of the Qi refining realm, he probably wanted to use these 3 foundation establishment pills as a final struggle. If I'd known earlier, I would have cut the Gordian knot. 300 high-grade spirit stones. It's not like I can't afford it. Meng Tian secretly regretted. Sure enough, Zhang Yu said with a smile, since both fellow Taoists want the refining method of the talisman, and both of you are around the same time, I won't say anything more. The highest bidder gets it. What do you all think? That's the only way, Yin Luiying said with a smile. Soon after, she looked around and said with a clear smile, which other fellow Taoist is interested in the refining method? Please come over together. However, I'll say this first. We've already left our names, so any fellow Taoist who goes up must also reveal their true identity. Xiao Hua heard the first part of Yin Luiying's words, and his heart was greatly moved. Unfortunately, he couldn't take out 300 high-grade spirit stones for the time being. When he heard the last part of Yin Luiying's words, he gave up even more. A brat at the 2nd level of the Qi refining realm, competing with a foundation establishment cultivator for the talisman refining method, that was truly courting death. Looking to the side, there were also many people who were restless at first, but soon after, they all became quiet. Just like Xiao Hua, they quietly watched. Hee, little sister Rue, did you see that? It's the same scene as the last time we met in East City. These 3 seniors are also going to bid. A gentle voice came from behind Xiao Hua. That voice wasn't loud, but it slowly became clear. Clearly, someone had walked behind Xiao Hua. That's right, brother Fan. It seems that every time East City has such interesting things. This was a woman's voice. It carried a bit of sadness, a bit of melancholy, and a bit of curiosity. When these 2 sentences entered Xiao Hua's ears, it was simply countless times louder than the clamor of the entire city. It was as if 2 thunderbolts had struck Xiao Hua's ears. Moreover, these words were like a top-grade confinement talisman. No, it was like a body immobilization technique, which froze Xiao Hua in place. Xiao Hua only felt his entire body stiffen, and he couldn't move an inch. However, in his heart, there was an incomparable longing. He longed to turn his head and look at Xiao Xinrue, who was no longer his senior sister. Isn't that so? At East City, there are always strange things that attract the covetous eyes of many. For example, the refining method of this fire snake talisman is usually passed down in secret by talisman-making sections. It's definitely not easily taken out. Presumably, this fellow Taoist at the 11th level of Qi refining saw that there was no hope of breaking through, so he came up with this plan. Regardless of whether these 3 seniors obtain the refining method, their sects will be able to refine the fire snake talisman. A fire snake talisman is worth a lot of spirit stones. If it weren't for the fact that our 100 Herbs sect isn't good at talisman making, I would also want to compete with them. Zhang Fan's voice rang out. These 3 seniors are all in the foundation establishment stage. If you go up, won't you be causing trouble for our 100 Herbs sect? Xiao Xinrue's tone was rather worried and reproachful. Sister Rue, you're wrong. These 3 seniors have made their identities clear in order to avoid trouble. No matter who reveals their identity, as long as they have enough spirit stones, they can openly purchase the method of making charms in their hands. Then, others won't look for trouble. Xiao Xinrue rebuked. Then, last time at East City, wasn't it because of the peacock fantasy that we encountered the 10,000 Poisons sect? If it weren't for you, how could there be so much trouble? Hee. If it weren't for the peacock fantasy and the 10,000 Poisons sect, How could I have met and become friends with you? Zhang Fan said in a low voice. Xiao Xinrui softly snorted through her nose. It sounded very sweet. Xiao Hua no longer paid attention to what was happening at the stall in front of him. He only focused on listening to the sounds behind him. What a pity. The peacock fantasy is a witness to our meeting. You're actually willing to give it to Xiao Hua. Zhang Fan was somewhat unwilling. Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat. -5. Chapter 1336. Xiao Xinrui giggled and said, You and I are already together. With the peacock illusion in my hands, I can still reminisce about the past, but it's better to let it go with Xiao Hua. Alas, I don't know how Xiao Hua is now. It's hard to say. According to the news from Huanhua sect, Xiao Hua hasn't appeared around Huanhua sect. He's only a second-layer qi refining cultivator and has no experience outside. Where could he have gone? I'm afraid he was either eaten by a demon beast or killed by a rogue cultivator. Zhang Fan whispered with regret. What a pity. That peacock illusion. Oh, if Sister Rue is worried, when we return from E-City, I'll send a disciple to look for Xiao Hua. Don't look for him for what? Xiao Xinrui quickly shook her head. Just as she was about to speak, Xiao Hua, who was wearing a camouflage robe, slightly turned his head, glanced at the two, and coughed in a low voice. The familiar coughing sound caused Xiao Xinrui's whole body to shake, but when she looked up at Xiao Hua, she was immediately disappointed. Zhang Fan hurriedly bowed and said, This poor Taoist was rude. Please forgive me. Xiao Hua didn't answer. He turned his head, and his eyes were filled with Xiao Xinrui's unusually delicate face. At this time, Xiao Xinrui was much thinner than before. Her eyebrows were slightly wrinkled, and her big eyes carried a trace of confusion and worry. In front of the crowd, the competition between the three Foundation establishment cultivators had already reached its climax. All three of them were flushed with anger. The surrounding cultivators were also looking on happily, quietly waiting for the method to refine the fire serpent talisman to fall into someone's hands. However, in this crowd, there were two people who were different from the others. Although Xiao Hua's eyes were looking forward, all of his attention was placed behind him. He turned a deaf ear to the three Foundation establishment cultivators. Xiao Xinrui's eyes were looking forward, but from time to time, her eyes would glance at Xiao Hua, who was of the same height as her. She thought to herself, that the coughing sound was obviously Xiao Hua's. But how could Xiao Hua have a camouflage robe? Back then, only when I, Shang Huaming, went bankrupt could I exchange for a camouflage robe. Xiao Hua couldn't have exchanged for one in such a short time. But if it wasn't him, why was the sound so similar? Even if Mystique can change its voice, it can't completely change into another person's voice. Not long after, the competition in front of the crowd came to an end. Yin Luiying from the Lumen faction was rich and overbearing. She directly used the price of 400 high-grade spiritual stones to buy the talisman crafting method of the Fire Snake Talisman. On the other hand, Meng Tian and Zhan Yu were slightly depressed. After Yin Luiying stored the talisman crafting technique into her storage pouch and handed over the spirit stones to the old man, she cupped her hands towards Meng Tian and Zhan Yu in satisfaction before swaggering off. Meng Tian and Zhan Yu also smiled bitterly at each other before parting ways. Seeing that the three of them had left, the onlookers had also dispersed. Xiao Hua sighed in his heart, then turned around to look at Xiao Xinrui and disappeared along with the crowd. Let's go, Sister Rue. Let's take a look over there. Maybe there's something similar to the peacock fantasy. Zhang Fan obviously didn't notice Xiao Xinrui's absent-minded expression. He pulled Xiao Xinrui's sleeve and walked in the opposite direction. Xiao Xinrui looked at Xiao Hua, who had already disappeared. She also sighed from the bottom of her heart and turned around to leave. Xiao Xinrui knew that even if the person wearing the mystique was Xiao Hua, there were more than 100 people wearing the same mystique in E-City. As long as Xiao Hua disappeared and immediately reappeared, who would know that the two mystique were the same person? She might never find Xiao Hua again. In fact, Xiao Hua also had the same idea. After leaving, he turned around and wanted to walk back to Xiao Xinrui's side. However, he only walked a few steps before stopping. He secretly asked in his heart, why should I go back now? Yes, what could Xiaohua do? Be a spectator? Look at the sweet relationship between Jiang Fan and Xiao Xinrui. It would be fine if he didn't see it, but if he saw it too much, wouldn't it arouse Jiang Fan's suspicion? Forget it. Forget it. We've already embarked on different paths. Why should we think about reuniting? Xiaohua let out a bitter laugh from the bottom of his heart. His footsteps slipped, and he deviated from the direction he was going and went to another place. After walking for a long time, Xiaohua still didn't find anything suitable. Just as he was feeling depressed, he saw that there were more cultivators in front of him compared to other places. Isn't this the place where I met Shi Wuming last time? It seems to be selling demonic tools. Why are there so many of them today? Because he had experienced the power of the demonic spear, Xiaohua was also curious about the demonic tools. He quickly walked a few steps and entered the area. Today was the same as that day. There were also some cultivators sitting cross-legged. Some pitch-black demonic tools were placed in front of them. Just like other places, there were many more demonic tools, and there were also many more people looking at them. Xiaohua followed some people and walked to the front of a stall. Like the others, he first looked at the demonic tools on the stall. These demonic tools were also strange of every description. He couldn't see what they were used for. Seeing the others pick up the demonic tools and touch them with their hands and carefully look at them with their eyes, Xiaohua followed suit. He picked up a demonic tool that was similar to a 5-star one. He knew that the demonic spear was very heavy, so he thought that the 5-star one would be heavy as well. However, the 5-star one was extremely light, as if it didn't have any weight. Xiaohua used all his strength and almost flipped himself over. His figure slightly staggered. The stall owner seemed to have noticed Xiaohua's abnormality and coldly glanced at him. Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. Fortunately, this bewildering mist is the real deal. The stall owner actually didn't see through Xiaohua's bewildering mist. The stall owner said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist, be careful." And, "I know," Xiaohua replied. His voice was very old. Obviously, Xiaohua changed his voice through the bewildering mist. The 5-star one's hand was extremely cold, bone-piercing cold. However, Xiaohua looked left and right, up and down, but he didn't find anything strange. The 5-star 5 corners weren't sharp and didn't have any similarities with the demonic spear tip. Fellow Taoist, Xiaohua thought for a moment and put the 5-star on the stall. He cupped his hands and asked, "May I ask, where did fellow Taoist get this demonic tool?" The stall owner was slightly stunned. Soon after, he said with some displeasure, "This demonic tool is of course in the Imperial Demon Valley. As for how it fell into I's hands, fellow Taoist shouldn't be interested. If fellow Taoist likes this demonic tool, I will let you have some. Take 10 top-grade spirit stones, and this demonic tool will belong to fellow Taoist." 10 top-grade spirit stones? Xiaohua immediately denied and secretly cursed. Why is it so expensive? It's better to rob. However, Xiaohua immediately thought of the might of the demonic spear tip. Compared to 10 top-grade spirit stones, this price didn't seem expensive. "I will choose again," Xiaohua said with a smile. Fellow Taoist, as you wish." The stall owner nodded and then reminded, "I obtained this demonic tool from the Battle of the Imperial Demon Valley 3 years ago. It's definitely the latest. Last time, a lot of it was sold in the e-market. There's only a little left. If fellow Taoist doesn't decide today, I'm afraid that in the next e-market, you won't see this demonic tool and won't see this demonic tools area." Imperial Demon Valley? Battle? Xiaohua was stunned. Could it be some kind of battle between immortals and demons? Xiaohua didn't know what the battle between immortals and demons was. He only heard Zhang Qingxiao nagging in his ear. "I want to make a move, but I haven't found anything suitable." Xiaohua thought for a moment and prevaricated, "I know fellow Taoist concerns. This demonic tool can't be controlled with divine sense and can't be activated with magic power. Their specific effects can only be explored by oneself. However, fellow Taoist, you have to understand that there are only so many demonic tools. If fellow Taoist doesn't make a move as soon as possible, there won't be any left after today. Moreover, if fellow Taoist's luck is good, you may encounter a demonic tool that can be used by fellow Taoists' special divine ability. Then, fellow Taoist will make a fortune. Although this demonic tool is the remnant of the true demonic tool of the demon realm, its quality and other aspects are more powerful than the magic tools and treasures of my Xiaoyu continent. Then, fellow Taoist, do you have a relatively sharp demonic tool that can kill people as long as it's inserted into their body? Xiaohua asked. He, fellow Taoist, is indeed an expert. Take a look at this. As he spoke, the cultivator slapped his storage bag and took out a pitch-black dagger and handed it over. Xiaohua took it. The dagger was also very light. The blade and the tip of the dagger faintly glowed with a cold light, appearing extremely sharp. Good stuff. Xiaohua was not stingy with his praise. Indeed, this demonic tool is also one of the intact ones in Ai's possession. Not only is it incomparably sharp, but it also has the blood-sucking ability that fellow Taoist mentioned. As long as this demonic tool is inserted into the body of a cultivator, the true blood in their heart meridians will be sucked away by the demonic tool, thus killing the cultivator. If it's a dark cultivator from the demon realm, the true nucleus in their heart meridians will also be broken and sucked into the demonic tool. Blood-sucking? Xiaohua secretly nodded and asked, such a good thing. How many spirit stones? I have been long-winded with you, so just give me 15 top-grade spirit stones. So much? Xiaohua was once again dumbfounded. At this time, Shi Wuming's hateful face was already incomparably benevolent in Xiaohua's mind. Shi Wuming had reduced the price of the demonic spear tip from 10 top-grade spirit stones to 1 top-grade spirit stone, and Xiaohua himself did not have to pay that many spirit stones to obtain the demonic spear tip. Xiaohua looked at the stall owner and cupped his hands. He did not say anything and continued to walk towards another stall. This stall was similar to the previous one, but there were a few more people. These people could not squeeze in, so they did not squeeze and just stood there quietly watching. Fellow Taoist. Xiaohua's courage increased a lot. He came in front of an 11th stage Qi refining cultivator and cupped his hands and asked, "Are the demonic tools in this stall all from 3 years ago?" The cultivator glanced at Xiaohua and said, "The stall owner said so. How can we know? Unless we go to the Imperial Devil Valley and guard there. As long as a cultivator comes out of the valley, we will go and ask for the demonic tools. Only then can we guarantee that we will get the real demonic tools." These demonic tools all come from the Imperial Devil Valley? Xiaohua looked up at the stall in the distance and asked in a very casual tone. To be continued. -5. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.